It's a privilege to be joined by Attorney General Jack Conway, who's running for governor of Kentucky, as well as Andy Beshear, who's a lawyer running for Attorney General. These two gentlemen have been traveling across the Commonwealth, getting their word out, and we appreciate them sharing their information with us today, speaking to us directly, but also sharing their comments across the Commonwealth and also in other states of how they plan to represent coal, to talk about coal, to what their position is, and how they see them interfacing with a federal government that, as we all know, has been very critical of our industry and damaging to our industry. So I appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedules to speak with us, and we will begin with General Conway. I would ask that General Conway tell us a little bit about himself. General, some of these folks in the room are from other states. Many are Kentuckians. You have the board and membership of the Kentucky Coal Association here. But I think it's a chance to sort of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your positions, not just related to coal, but also energy issues, and how you see yourself leading the Commonwealth for the next 4 years. Ladies and gentlemen, General Jack Conway.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you for that kind introduction. Hope you all are having a good meeting. It's nice to see many of you all. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today to talk about where I see coal headed, the future of energy in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, to talk a little bit about my background, and to talk a little bit about this race and this decision that we're facing here in 25 days. I do want to talk to you a little bit about my background and where I come from, and then I want to talk to you about what I've done, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we can go together. Most people in Kentucky know that I make my home in Jefferson County. I was born and raised there, but I'm one generation removed from a family farm in Union County, Kentucky. My father's actually from Morganfield. My father is a Southern Baptist from Union County, Kentucky. My mother's a devout Catholic from South Louisville. I often joke that between those two religions, I have enough guilt to last for 3 lifetimes. But I did grow up spending a lot of time down in Union County, Kentucky, which is I think either typically our first or second largest coal-producing county in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I had my cousin's family worked in the mines down in Union County, and I grew up seeing the value of coal mining and seeing coal literally putting food on the table of families that I knew in western Kentucky, and that was something that was ingrained in me from a very early age. As I said, we would go 8 to 10 times a year down to see my grandparents in Union County, and so I was exposed to it at an early age. When I graduated from law school and took the bar, and what I did in 1995 is I came back and helped get a coal operator elected governor right after getting out of law school, and he asked me shortly after getting elected to stay and be his legal counsel, Governor Patton, in 1995. So I was still wet behind the ears, young lawyer working for Governor Patton, and for any of you who know Paul Patton, that was an education in many things, I'll tell you that. Governor Patton is still, as you know, in Pike County. He still drives around and he's got a car with a bumper sticker on the back of it that says "Mine every lump." So that's how he feels about coal and the importance of coal in Kentucky. And I worked with him on a lot of issues that were important to the coal industry, particularly during his first term in office. I worked for him for 6 years. I was the guy who sat down and put pen to paper, now largely at his direction, but put pen to paper and wrote out the thin seam tax credits. So if you're mining a seam of coal that's 36 inches or less, you can apply for certain tax credits that make it more economic actually to mine the coal. We passed that. I wrote the bill, testified on it. Passed that about 15 years ago. Obviously, Governor Patton, when he saw a workers' compensation system in Kentucky that was overly litigious, that was disadvantageous to business, in particular the coal industry, he set about trying to reform that. I worked with him on that legislation and helped draft key components of that legislation. When Peabody Coal Company wanted to continue to mine in western Kentucky, actually in Union County of all places, at the camp complex, they were looking for certain tax incentives to help them with reinvestment, and it required a tweaking of the Kentucky Industrial Revitalization Act. And so I actually sat down once again and put pen to paper so that one of our coal companies could keep mining coal in western Kentucky. and was very proud to work with Rick Whiting and with those in labor who wanted to see the mining continue in Union County, Kentucky. So that's another experience I had in the Patton administration. And through all of that, I took an interest in energy issues. I took an interest in what the Public Service Commission was doing during that particular time in Kentucky's history, and I sort of became an informal energy advisor to the administration on all of those issues. And so we did a lot of things that benefited rural Kentucky, benefited eastern Kentucky. We used the Kentucky Infrastructure Authority to actually bond $2 billion worth of better water lines, particularly in eastern Kentucky, and I know many of the coal operators in eastern Kentucky have benefited from that. So that's a little bit of my background and how I come to view some of the issues that I'm dealing with as your Attorney General and now as a candidate for governor. I hope you know that I am the only Democratic Attorney General in the country to sue the EPA over these new coal regs that they put forward, the new greenhouse gas rule. I did it because when it comes to an issue like this and when it comes to our families and Kentucky's energy production and the advantages that we enjoy, it's time to put people over politics. You always put Kentucky first. And yes, I'm a Democrat. But when a decision time comes and it's time to put your state over politics, folks, rest assured, I will always put Kentucky first, and I will always put people over politics. In fact, I think I've sued the EPA, 8 separate times on 8 separate occasions. It's either 8 or 9 now, Bill. I don't know. We're coming up on that. And folks, I'm going to give you a little bit of hope here today, because I know I talk to folks in the coal industry, and they're down about the EPA. They're down about the state of the market. I'm going to predict something here today on this challenge to the new Clean Power Plan and the greenhouse gas rule. We're going to win. We're going to win that lawsuit. Now, it doesn't look like we're going to win it as quickly as we would like to, but we're going to win. And I hope you recognize that I've not only put Kentucky's name on the lawsuit against the EPA, we've been fairly aggressive about it. Not fairly, we've been really aggressive about it. My office has stayed in constant communication with Attorney General Morrissey over in West Virginia. We've worked very, very closely on this. And actually, when we first filed the lawsuit, we sought an injunction on the front end. And it was fairly novel, because normally you can't, when you challenge a rule promulgated by an administrative agency like the Environmental Protection Agency, you have to wait until it's final and published before you can challenge it in the D.C. Circuit. However, we went ahead and sought an injunction in this case when the rule was first proposed. And we did it for a number of reasons. Number one, we've got a good case. We've got a really good case. When you look at the proposed greenhouse gas rule, the EPA is proposing to regulate carbon under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. It is questionable whether or not they can do that. It looks to me, and it looks to a lot of legal experts, like they're double regulating under separate sections of the Clean Air Act, and it's questionable whether or not they have the authority to go under that particular section. Additionally, for power plants that have been retrofitted once, the Clean Air Act is very specific that once they've been retrofitted, they go into a new source category. But what the EPA is attempting to do here is actually re-regulate them again and not give them that new source categorization under the Clean Air Act. Additionally, in a very reasonable way, as part of the rulemaking process, I, along with other attorneys general, asked the Environmental Protection Agency to go ahead and put forward the science that they were relying on for this new rule. The Environmental Protection Agency literally withheld their science in doing this. So they haven't put the information out there. They're not following their own statute. And I think we have a good chance of winning this case. I also am really heartened by the fact that we won a recent case at the Supreme Court. This summer, if you notice, the Supreme Court struck down the MATS rule. I mean, Kentucky sued on that case. It's another instance of us suing the EPA. The thing that was so disheartening, though, about winning on the MATS case was it sort of felt like the medicine got there after the patient had already died. Because what we saw is that the EPA came forward with the MATS rule, and you all know this from being in the coal business. If utility companies start to see a proposed EPA rule, what do? They start to plan for it. They think it's a fait accompli. They think it's going to happen. So the EPA put forward the MATS rule, and by our estimates, the MATS rule resulted in about 18% of our coal-fired generation being retired. in this state. So we retire 18% of coal-fired generation for a rule that in the end gets struck down by the Supreme Court. And that's what I mean by the medicine coming after the patient had died. And that's the reason we were so aggressive in suing on the Clean Power Plan on the front end, because what we were saying is, look, you know, the utility's going to plan for this. And if the EPA is exceeding their authority, if they're not following their own statute, then we need to know on the front end. Now, the courts have turned us away twice, both in terms of trying to get the preliminary injunction. We also tried to sue again this summer. But it is very clear that once this rule it's final, they say, but it's not published. Another example of the EPA acting really funny in this particular instance. They're going to publish it here in the next month or so. And when they publish it, we will refile our lawsuit. I will refile the lawsuit as Attorney General. Folks, if I'm elected your next governor, and I think I'm going to be, I will continue to press this issue as your next governor. But when we get it finally in front of the courts on the merits, based on that Matt's case and based on what they have done in this particular instance, I think we're going to win the case. I think we're going to win the case. So I'm going to keep pressing. And the Matt's case, one of the things that was really good about that particular decision is the Supreme Court was very, very clear. It was very clear that the Environmental Protection Agency has to do a cost-benefit analysis before doing one of these rules. And look, folks, I don't think they can withstand that scrutiny. They couldn't withstand it on Matt's, and I don't think they're going to be able to withstand it on the Clean Power Plan. Folks, I was also very, very proud a month or so ago in Lexington at the public comment period when OSM came to town and was taking comments on the new stream protection rule. I was proud to stand up on behalf of Kentucky's coal industry and condemn that as an overreach, that would really cause the cost of permitting to skyrocket and really, really harm coal production in this state. I have commented publicly, and I will do everything to fight with you against that overregulation, which really doesn't take into account how coal mining operates, particularly in eastern Kentucky. Also, folks, I hope you noticed I've been pretty aggressive on Public Service Commission issues as the Attorney General. It's my job to intervene on behalf of the ratepayers in front of the Public Service Commission. I intervened certainly in the case involving American Electric Power and Kentucky Power when they proposed to shut down the Big Sandy plant. Now, they did eventually shut down the Big Sandy plant. We lost that case. But I continue to appeal to the courts because here's why. In Kentucky, we have a Territory Act. You know, the Public Service Commission basically regulates investor-owned utilities. The grand bargain is they get a captive rate class, and they also get a regulated rate of return. What we have never allowed to happen in Kentucky is what happened in that particular case. The Public Service Commission, much to my dismay, basically said, okay, we're going to let American Electric Power shut down a Kentucky power plant. And we're going to allow them to transfer a portion of a West Virginia power plant, the Mitchell plant, into the Kentucky system, and we will have the Kentucky ratepayers amortize the cost of that particular power plant. Never before been done in history. Never before have we allowed an out-of-state plant to come in and get amortized by Kentucky ratepayers. I thought it was an awful precedent to set. You know, American Electric Power had extra assets. They sort of gambled on deregulation and what they thought the future was going to look like. And now we're paying the price through our ratepayers. And I've talked to a lot of people in the Kentucky Coal Association. They encouraged me to oppose it. I did. They've encouraged me to appeal. I know many coal producers can't really speak out about it because they want to keep selling coal to AEP. I understand that. But as your Attorney General, I was happy to take them on, and we continue to appeal. I mean, AEP tried to do this in Virginia, and the Virginia Public Service Commission wouldn't let them transfer a West Virginia asset into their system. So I don't understand why the Kentucky Public Service Commission let that happen. But let me say this. The Big Sandy plant is shut down now, but I'm going to do everything I can to keep it functional in some way. There's been talk amongst some investors about trying to retrofit it in some way and try to make it an example or a test project for some new ways to burn coal into the future. I'm going to do everything I can as your Attorney General over the next few months and hopefully as your next governor to make certain that we come up with a viable economic outcome for the Big Sandy facility in eastern Kentucky. So, folks, I've fought for you. I've stood by you. I will continue to stand by you. You may ask, you know, why do I feel so strongly about these issues? You know, I do it because the people that work in eastern Kentucky and in western Kentucky mining coal and helping us have our electricity advantage are proud people. This is proud, you know, honorable work. I think back to just staying at the Hilton Garden Inn in Pikeville just a few months ago, and The waitress who was pouring my coffee early one morning as I was having breakfast sat down. She knew who I was, and she said, "Please tell me you're going to do everything you can to try to bring coal jobs back. This place is not the same as it's been. My family's been working in the coal mines. We don't have jobs anymore. We're laid off. We're desperate. Please tell me you're going to do everything you can." And I looked her in the eye and said, "Look, I'll do everything I can." I think about my friend Dan Talo, who's got Thoroughbred Coal. Many of you probably know Dan. He's got the loading docks there along the Big Sandy River. I think about being with him a couple months ago, and he showed me the piles of coal he had ready for transport just a few years ago. And I think he has something like 1/10 of the coal inventory on hand now that he had just a few days ago. My friend Todd Case in the trucking industry, telling me how much his business is down over the last several years. Coal permeates throughout the economy of Kentucky, and I understand that. And I also understand that our low cost of electricity, which coal has provided for years and years and years, is a real economic development tool for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I mean, folks, there's a reason there's so many auto plants here. There's a reason we make so much aluminum. There's a reason we make so much steel. It's because of our low cost of electricity, and I'll do anything that I can to try to preserve that. So where do we go in the future? If I'm elected as your next governor, let me say this. You will always have a seat at the table. I will always value having a collaborative relationship with you. As your next governor, we will put together a cabinet that is reasonable. Look, folks, I do believe in regulation. I think most people in the coal industry believe in regulation. They just want it to be prudent and reasonable and allow people to go about mining coal in a safe way that's profitable. And I will try to work with you toward those ends. Folks, I am not going to submit a state implementation plan to the EPA as long as this lawsuit is ongoing. I'm going to win this lawsuit, and we're not going to be submitting a SIP as long as this is going on. And I think we're going to win this case, but I'll tell you, everything's on the table when I'm your next governor to keep fighting the EPA because they are really, really harming our economy. You're going to have a governor who will work with you to try to market Kentucky coal, both within the Commonwealth, both within this country, and also outside of our borders. You know, one thing a governor can do is to try to be an economic development champion for his or her state, and I intend to be a governor who tries to market Kentucky coal all over the world. And in eastern Kentucky and in western Kentucky, we'll work together to make certain that more of the coal severance tax money actually gets to the counties. Folks, I enjoy a good working relationship with Congressman Rogers. We've worked very closely together on the drug issue, which has been so devastating to his congressional district. He's even given the Office of the Attorney General the Soaring Eagle Award for working so well on the prescription pill issue in eastern Kentucky. And let me say this, just as an aside, I'm very proud of the fact that as your Attorney General, we've actually shut down half the pain clinics in this state, and for the first time in a generation, we see the number of prescriptions for OxyContin and hydrocodone going down. But I've worked very well with Hal in the past. We will continue to work together in the future. I am pledged, unlike my opponent, I'm pledged to continuing the SOAR initiative. I think it's very important to focus on eastern Kentucky and the needs of eastern Kentucky. Governor Beshear has actually started a public-private partnership to build out the middle mile of infrastructure of broadband throughout the state. But he and Hal Rogers have agreed that it needs to start in eastern Kentucky. And here within about a year and a half, we're going to have the latest infrastructure built out to the counties of eastern Kentucky because I think it's very, very important for economic development, and I will continue that. Folks, I'm focused on worker retraining. I know we have a skills gap in this state. As I travel throughout the state, I hear so many employers who have jobs in advanced manufacturing and IT, they just can't find the workers. They can't find the workers. So when I get elected as governor, we're going to re-engineer the workforce development cabinet. I'm going to reprioritize the Kentucky Community and Technical College system to make certain that they're focused on the needs of local employers. And you're going to see a focus on skills training and workforce development like you haven't seen in the past. So folks, I'm actually hopeful. I know it's tough times and tough sledding dealing with this particular Environmental Protection Agency and dealing with this particular administration. But I will always stand up for Kentucky, and I will always put her first. And I just want to thank the members of this organization who've been supportive of my campaign. If you're looking at the newspaper, they say that we're up by 5 points. I think that's about right. My pollster's telling me we're up by about 5 points. I think we're going to win this race, and it's coming up here with 25 days to go. It's hard to believe we're 25 days away from selecting the next governor and lieutenant governor and the next attorney general of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I really think this is a choice between the mainstream and the extreme. And I'm so honored that I've had so many Republicans have come forward and are supporting us. We actually have a committee called Republicans for Conway. It's actually chaired by Jamie Comer's home county judge in Monroe County, Judge Willett. We have over 100 business leaders that have come forward to be part of the steering committee of Republican business leaders for Conway. I think they know what I hope everyone knows, and that's that I will be a governor who can reach across the aisle, who can get things done. I'll work with Republicans, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being the next governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I'm honored to have the support of people like Mitch Potter and Jesse and Lynn Parrish and Jim Booth and others. And I know you're going to hear from my opponent here in a little bit, and I'm sure he'll come in and talk about some contribution in the past from the Sierra Club, or claim that some legislative committee had to tell me what to do when it came to the EPA. Folks, look, there's 20 years of proof with me on my commitment to the coal industry. There's 20 years of proof of me working for Governor Patton. There's proof of me understanding what a coal economy can do for a county like Union County, which is my dad's home county. There's years and years of proof of my taking on the EPA because it was the right thing to do for Kentucky, and it was putting us over politics. And I hope you will keep that in mind, and I'd be honored to have your support here in 25 days. And thanks for what you do for the economy of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Thank you very much.
General Conway, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time today. And before I introduce Andy Bashir to you, I wanted to let you know that we have 3x5 cards. That's how we're doing questions today. And I know this isn't a shy group, so please get those 3x5 cards to David Moss. You can see him there. Hold up your hand. He can bring one over to you. But this is a wonderful time to ask questions of these folks. And here, yeah, Andy has some questions, I get, perhaps for me, I don't know. But seriously, let's ask some questions too, because they're donating their time here, and I think it's a good opportunity to hear from them directly. But without further ado, the candidate for Attorney General, Andy Bashir.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for having me. Bill, thanks for inviting us. Jack, thanks for giving my speech. But it's nice to be here in Lexington. You know, I grew up most of my childhood right here in town. I'm a Henry Clay graduate, just down the street, and I appreciate being back. I want to talk a little bit about the reasons I got into this race, and then I will get directly into the coal issues that face this state and are so imperative. First, to introduce you, I'm Andy Bashir. And I'm the proud husband of Brittany Bashir, who you all may have seen in an ad or two. And I hope you like those because they're positive. And we were really happy to start that way. Brittany is an amazing partner in life, not only in our marriage and in raising kids, but also in the issues I deeply care about. When we went out to Floyd County to go underground with Jesse Parrish, Brittany came. She did the whole thing because she wanted to understand firsthand the issues that are facing you and are facing our Commonwealth. And I'm really blessed to have a partner who's right there with me. Brittany and I are the parents of a 5-year-old daughter, Lila, and a 6-year-old son, Will. And folks, it's because of that family that I want to be your next Attorney General. I want to wake up every single day in this job to fight for the safety not only of my kids, but of all Kentucky's children and families. I want to build stronger families and safer communities across this Commonwealth. And I think that we do that by addressing some key challenges that can face any family, regardless of where they live in this state and regardless of what party they may belong to. First issue that I think it faces our families, first challenge, is Kentucky's epidemic level of child abuse. It's something we don't talk about a lot. We like being number 1 or 2 in different things in Kentucky, but we are number 1 or 2 in virtually every child abuse statistic they keep. That's something I can't live with as a dad, and I won't live with as your next Attorney General. That's why we put out a 7-point plan. It's available on andybashir.com about exactly how we're going to go about it. I'm going to create a division of child abuse and exploitation inside the Attorney General's office with dedicated prosecutors, investigators, and policy experts whose sole job day in and day out, is to chip away at this epidemic. We're going to bring our technology, our background checks up to the standard today, the standard you all would use to hire your executives, to make sure that these serial predators can't get into our schools or into our daycares. And then we're going to close the gaps that currently exist in our child care industries. I'll give you one stunning example. It's summer camps. As the dad of a 5- and 6-year-old, I can't survive the summer without summer camps. Right now in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there's not one rule, not one, about who can, but more importantly, who can't work at a summer camp. We've got to do better. I promise you we will do better. Second challenge facing Kentucky's families is something that Jack mentioned, and everybody in this room and in every room across the Commonwealth has been touched by. It's our drug epidemic. It's really an addiction crisis because we've had pills, now we have heroin, we're seeing the rise of synthetics including flakka, and coming down the line there's this dangerous drug called fentanyl. It's a heavy-duty anesthetic, 100 times more powerful than heroin. It caused 74 overdoses in 72 hours in Chicago over this last weekend. We have got to be as relentless as those who are out there peddling drugs. That's why on Monday we put out a 3-prong, 12-initiative plan about how we're going to go about it. It's going to focus on better law enforcement, where we finally treat the dealers as dealers. You know, if you talk to your local sheriffs or police officers, they'll express frustration to you. They'll express frustration that currently under the law, whether it's the heroin bill or others, that they're arresting the same street-level drug dealers that would deal to your kids or mine every other day because they're being treated like users in the system based on how much they have on them. We have got to do better. We've got to work better across interstate lines to where that dealer can't simply run across the river to Cincinnati, given that Northern Kentucky is dealing with such a heroin crisis. We have got to invest as a state in treatment. That's something that General Conway has been not only a big proponent of, but a big funder of, putting more than $20 million directly into drug treatment. Folks, we don't just have a generation that's addicted. We have the generation behind them that has huge risks of being that next stage of addiction. It never hit me harder than when I did a ride around with the Franklin County Sheriff. We went on 2 drug busts. The first one had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old child in that house. They were watching the same cartoons my kids watch. The second one had 5 boxes of kids' toys. I recognized every single toy. And it hit me at my core that day that the best thing that we could do for those innocent children, and they are innocent children, but for the lottery of their birth, they could be mine, is to get at least one parent home and healthy that can raise them with the way that so many of us were blessed to be raised. Third issue facing our families hits the other end, our parents and grandparents, and it hits business. It's the unprecedented number of scams we're seeing right now, whether it's the grandparent scam, the IRS scam, right now, the jury service scam, and the hundreds and hundreds of other scams out there or coming down the pipe. That's why we put out a senior protection plan, again on andybashir.com, that goes over exactly how we want to address it, including a division of senior protection inside the office with dedicated investigators and a hotline to where when you get that call, when you get that questionable call, you can call up and say, is this a scam? And they're there to help you. If that's not on the list, they take your information, they run it down, and they get back to you, because the best thing we can do is protect you up front. But it's not lost on me that all of these issues that we face, that we can do more by improving and protecting our economy. And that's why you will find that I am a strong proponent, and I will be a strong friend to our coal industry and our coal miners. Folks, coal is a part of the fabric of this state. It provides great paying jobs in East and West Kentucky that you and I know don't just support one family. They may support 2, 3, or even 4. They are the lifeblood of communities that right now, if you walk through, they hurt you. It just hurts you. You can feel it. You can feel that desperation because of the loss of those good paying jobs. It provides us the low-cost electricity that has allowed Kentucky to create such a vibrant manufacturing base. That low-cost electricity is what they rely on, as Jack said, whether it's GE or others, to meet margins that in a competitive world get smaller and smaller and smaller. And being someone with a business law background who would actually have the most sophisticated business law background going into this office of any attorney general going back to the 70s, I can tell you it is our best economic development selling tool. You know, all different states will try to sell their incentives to different companies, and we have good ones. Different states will try to sell other things about living in this state, about workforce, but our low-cost electricity that is driven through our coal industry, I have found, is our single greatest economic development tool. And then there's the ratepayer portion. Thanks to our coal industry, we have some of the lower energy bills in the country. And the EPA's actions, whether it's in the power plants or others, threatens all of this. They're not only irresponsible, they are likely illegal. Like Jack said, Section 111D in my reading, or I think any other reasonable reading, does not allow for the regulation that the EPA is trying. The waters of the U.S. Push. Well, we now know that even the Army Corps of Engineers didn't think and doesn't think that that is a legal way of going about extending their jurisdiction. Folks, this is a big fight. You know, the EPA's got a lot of lawyers on their side. And so I see this Attorney General's race as the people of Kentucky hiring a lawyer. And I think you'd want to hire one that has the skills to take on these suits that Jack has started and win. And folks, I think I'm the only lawyer in this race. We have to be lawyers to be in this race. But I think I'm the only lawyers in this race with those skills. I'm battle tested. Folks, I've been in the large bet the company, bet the industry, multi-million-dollar cases and won. I've taken on government in the form of a city and a mayor that tried to crush a small business simply because they could. We stood up to City Hall in their home court and we won. That's the type of experience you need taking on the EPA. I'm respected by my peers. I've been honored to have been selected by my fellow lawyers, and lawyers are pretty picky, as one of the best lawyers in America for 4 straight years. And folks, I've got the skills to take on the most complicated cases in front of this office. Like I said, I've taken on government and won. I've been in environmental litigation and won. I understand environmental regulations, whether it's on the state or the federal level, and have worked successfully in it. We cannot afford, with how important these lawsuits are, to not have the best lawyer representing you. And that includes an understanding of we don't just have to win it, and I agree with Jack, we will win that lawsuit. But we have to do it as quickly as possible. And it explains why Jack has been so aggressive, and he has been as aggressive as you can be as an attorney general in these actions. But why he's been so aggressive on timing? Because we both know that every day that passes where the federal government is trying to go in this direction causes damage to this industry that we might not be able to get back. So what I can tell you is I not only have the knowledge to push and to win these cases, but I have the procedural background to where we will try to speed it up every single day, knowing that not only does it affect your business, it affects all of those miners, all of those workers who, if they still have a job right now, are lucky, and we've got to get more of them back to work. Ultimately, a large part of the future of the Commonwealth depends on how we do, folks. Depends on how we do. Whether it's the industry itself and its jobs, whether it's preserving the manufacturing base we have, whether it's recruiting new companies to come in with good paying jobs for our people, or whether it's you, I, or the most vulnerable out there can afford their next electricity bill. The most unfortunate thing about what the government is trying to do is that it's going to be done on the backs of Kentucky ratepayers. Because if our utilities out there start switching their means of production, you and I know that ultimately under the law, who pays for it? Every single Kentucky ratepayer. Everybody receiving those bills. And if this change is made, if the federal government pushes forward, Not only are the folks most vulnerable not going to be able to afford that, no one in this room is going to be able to afford that power bill. This threatens our basic economic reality, subsistence, and our ability to move forward. So folks, I hope you hear that I'm ready. I mean, I'm fired up. I'm fired up about the opportunity to do this job, and I'm fired up about the opportunity to represent Kentuckians on the biggest and the most important cases. I look forward to working with you. I look forward to working for the best interests of Kentuckians, and I look forward to getting in, digging into these cases, and representing you like the type of lawyer that you would go out on the market and hire. Thank you all.
Thank you all for submitting questions. I want to go through them. I should warn the candidates that there are political questions in here, policy questions, and even ideology questions, which I'm sure they're very used to at this point, really, but do want to ask these questions that came from our membership, so thank you for submitting them. But as you both know, we have a General Assembly in Kentucky, and one is controlled in Democrat hands, the other one in Republican. Most of these questions, by the way, let me interrupt quickly. We'll go to General Conway, but Mr. Beshear, please feel free to jump in where you would like. How will you work with this split-party General Assembly moving forward as governor?
Well, thanks for that question. I think the best way to try to predict what someone's going to do in the future is to look at what they've done in the past. And I think I have a record of reaching across the aisle and actually getting things done. I have a good working relationship with Robert Stivers. Obviously, he's a member of the other party, but he and I are both passionate about issues like early childhood education. I've even gone to Whitley County with him to look at an early learning center that he's very, very passionate about. Take a look at House Bill 1. The legislation that gave us additional tools to combat the prescription pill epidemic in this state. I had to work with members of both chambers and both parties to get that passed. And as a result of that legislation, we've been able to shut down about half the pain clinics in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The heroin legislation that just passed this last session of the General Assembly, it's actually based on a bill that I drafted along with Katie Stein, the Republican senator from Northern Kentucky, because Northern Kentucky was facing such a heroin epidemic. We sat down and we gave additional tools to our first responders to administer antidotes for heroin overdoses. We put in place a Good Samaritan law. We did a lot of other things to help us combat the heroin epidemic. Take a look at getting my cybercrimes legislation passed, which gave us and law enforcement additional tools and has allowed us to take 800,000 child porn images off of the internet during my term as Attorney General. I had to work with members of both parties to get that passed. Take a look at what I've done as Attorney General. I've been a leader amongst the AGs. I've been on the executive committee of the National Association of Attorneys General. It's known as NAG, one of the more unfortunate acronyms that we have in American politics. But what I've learned as Attorney General is that if you work with your colleagues, you can get a lot done. You know, ever since Attorneys General in 1998 went after the tobacco companies and really changed public health in this country, the AGs have figured out if they work together, they can get a lot done, and we do it in a bipartisan fashion. You know, if I send a letter to a corporate bad actor, they may or may not answer. If 35 attorneys general from both political parties start contacting somebody, you can effectuate change really quickly in this country, and that's what AGs have learned. I reached across the aisle and I worked with the Republican Attorney General of Florida, Pam Bondi, because Florida was actually the Wild West when it came to prescription pills, and they were literally flooding us with their unregulated pills. They didn't have a prescription drug monitoring program. Folks, here's how bad it was during my first term as Attorney General. The law enforcement executed a search warrant on a pain clinic in Broward County, Florida, and they seized 1,700 patient records. 1,700 patient records. Guess how many were from Kentucky? 1,100. You know, that's what we in law enforcement call a clue. You know, we had people going by the van load down to Florida to come back and bring pills back in this state. So I worked with Pam Bondi, who's the Republican Attorney General of Florida. We had to jointly browbeat Rick Scott, who's the Republican governor down there, to actually put in place a prescription drug monitoring program like Casper, like what we have here in Kentucky. And Florida, over the last few years, has stopped flooding us with pills because they've joined the mainstream of states that monitor pills and shut down their pain clinics. So it is important. It is important that you work with both chambers and with both parties. I came up under Governor Patton. I mentioned that to you several times during my remarks. Governor Patton was the master at putting his hand on a legislator's shoulder and saying, why don't you come over to the basement of the mansion and have a sandwich with me, and we'll talk about that. That's what you have to do as governor. You have to build those relationships with legislators. I have those relationships. My opponent does not. Quite frankly, my opponent does not. And when we had a debate on Kentucky Sports Radio last week, we were asked, what's the first thing you're going to do as governor? And he said one of the first things he was going to do was have a come to Jesus meeting with the legislature. That's not how it works, folks. It's a two-way street. There's give and take. You have to talk. And so I have those relationships. I understand how a governor's office is supposed to be run, and I will reach across the aisle. I'll work with Republicans, and as I said before, I will always put Kentucky first. Thank you.
Issues like threats to our coal industry, child abuse, drug treatment, scams, they're not partisan. There is nothing partisan about them. They're not Democrat or Republican, and they don't care, and we have got to get beyond that. The threats that face us as Kentuckians. They face us uniquely as Kentuckians, and we've got to come together regardless of what party we're in and realize that we need the most effective solutions and the effective people there pushing them. The heroin bill took 3 years to pass, and even in this last session where we knew it had to pass, it took the whole session. Meanwhile, overdose after overdose after overdose happened. Parents lost their children, grandparents lost their children. We lost an 18-year-old, I'll call him a kid, because he was a kid, in my neighborhood, 8 houses down from me during that period. I mean, it was one bad night, one bad decision. His friends took his wallet, his car keys, stole his car, and left him on a driveway to die. We got to realize that these things that afflict us, they don't discriminate based on party. And we've got to make sure that when we come together, we address priorities that impact us all, and we check all the rest at the door. And we're going to have to come to that realization because the threats are too great. When heroin's being sold in middle school, the threats are too great. And so what you're going to see from me in Frankfort is not only somebody who is willing to work with everybody, but is also willing to pressure them. And folks, I'm going to Frankfort to make a difference for your kids, for mine. I'm not going to Frankfort to make friends. And so what you will see out of me is a strong push on each and every one of those issues, both for what's right, but also in addressing them in as timely of a manner as we can. I think our future depends on it.
Generals, you probably know Kentucky has a high coal severance tax rate, especially when you look at contiguous states. Ohio has a 10-cent severance tax, and actually Illinois has no coal severance tax. What can be done to possibly lower that or become more in line with other states?
Well, I think we have to continue to monitor that. We do have a higher coal severance rate than, say, Ohio and Illinois. I think we're pretty competitive vis-a-vis West Virginia, and we also have a credit against the sales tax when coal is purchased for the production of electricity. So I'm going to continue to look at the coal severance tax. It's a significant portion of our budget, but obviously coal severance tax receipts have been going down. The important thing behind coal severance, though, is the theory that when it comes out of the ground, you take the tax, you put it into a special fund, and 50% of it is supposed to go back to the coal counties to help them with economic development. There's a theory behind the coal severance tax. And listen, if we're not being competitive, then we'll take a look at lowering it. I'll bring everybody to the table. We'll assess whether or not we're competitive or not competitive. And if that's something that we need to do, we will try to do it. But the other issue that we've got to look at is we have to look at how much of the money is actually getting back to the coal counties, because over the last several sessions of the General Assembly takes some off the top, they keep some in their fund, and very few of those dollars are actually getting back to the coal counties to help with economic development, which is really, really the theory behind the coal severance tax in the first place.
Thank you, General. I attended the West Virginia Coal Association meeting back in August, and there's a lot of talk in West Virginia of passing right-to-work legislation, and apparently there's great optimism that will happen. What are your positions on right-to-work? Is it something you would support as a governor?
I do not support right to work. I do not support right to work because as I look at states that are right to work states versus those that are not right to work states, on average, those that are in right to work states make about $1,500 less on average per worker than those that are in non-right to work states. So I oftentimes on the trail say I'm for the right to work for better wages. You know, I want to see wages go up in this state, and I don't want to adopt any policies. I don't want to adopt any policies that would have the potential to drive down wages. Secondly, if you look at Kentucky versus Indiana, a state that has recently passed right to work legislation, we are actually outpacing Indiana in terms of manufacturing jobs and the creation of manufacturing jobs. And Kentucky just last year, Governor Beshear won Site Selection Magazine's Governor's Cup for being the #1 place in terms of economic development and the creation of new jobs. If you look at business filings in this state, new business filings with the Secretary of State's office and compare it to other states, we're #2 per capita in the country. So I think we've got a good level of economic activity here. We can build on it. We can certainly do better. But I think that particular piece of legislation is actually a solution looking for a problem.
Thank you. One of my favorite questions to ask both of these gentlemen is, okay, it's the day after Election Day, what now? How do you put together a cabinet? How do you put together transition teams? How do you literally begin almost running the state that day? But in a few weeks' time, you will be the governor. You will be sworn in. You will be the attorney general. You will be sworn in. To both gentlemen, and how do you see assembling this cabinet, assembling your team, running as, you know, the office of governor? But also to you, Andy, you know, we talked about the final greenhouse gas regs and the lawsuit involving those. What are your strategies? How are you going to be able to hit the ground running with that kind of change, and also coming off a pretty arduous campaign trail? Both, actually.
Well, on November the 4th, I might try to get a little sleep. But Kentucky is, Kentucky is unique amongst the states in that when you're elected in November, you're headed right into a budget session in January. So in Kentucky, we go ahead and inaugurate the governor in December, and then the governor has to have a budget ready to go about a month after that. So how do you go about it? First of all, you have to have the broad base of policy experience in your background to know what kind of government you're going to put together. And look, I'm proud of my record as Attorney General. You know, I've cut my office's budget by 40%. We've shut down half the pain clinics. We've taken 800,000 child porn images off the internet. I've returned over $300 million to the state treasury. For every dollar the General Assembly's given me, I've returned nearly $4 to the state treasury. I've been fiscally responsible. I think I have a good record that I'm proud of. And as I mentioned to you as well, obviously I was legal counsel to a governor, so I know how this process works. The first thing you do is you name a director of transition and you start assembling your cabinet. And that is no time to be thinking about politics over policy. You got to think of policy over politics. And when I get elected governor, I'm going to put forward a call to bring forward the best people that want to serve in government. The director of transition will be looking at resumes. We'll be looking at the business sector to see who's willing to give us some time from the business sector to come in and run some of the cabinets. We will put together a cabinet that includes Republicans, that's diverse, that gives me the many perspectives that a governor needs in order to make the best decisions possible. The second thing you have to do when you get elected is you have to jump right in the middle of the budget process, because the budget process and getting the budget document ready for January actually starts in about 6 months beforehand. And the budget is the governor's primary policy document. So if you're getting elected in November and you're sworn in December and you have to have a budget ready to go in January, you need to jump right in the middle of the budget process and start pushing for your priorities. Your priorities. And so that's what I intend to do as well. In addition to getting the best people around me and putting a cabinet together, I'm going to start looking in the budget, seeing where there are efficiencies. Are there places that need to be cut? Are there areas like early childhood education where I think we can do more? You know, folks, it's not really your issue with the Coal Association, but it's all of our issue if you care about education and you care about our schools. And I happen to believe passionately that the child that shows up ready for kindergarten is the one that will go on and test well in grade school and go on to be college or career ready. And there's a big difference between these two campaigns on that particular issue. So we're going to be looking at areas where we can do more perhaps in early childhood education, and what are the budget priorities for workforce development, for example. How are the federal funds flowing to workforce development in this state? I'm going to be looking at that and really aligning the budget with the priorities that I want to push as governor.
You know, I've got an interesting perspective on this one, because I remember back to Inauguration Day in 2007. I don't know how many of you all remember that, but that was a December day. It was probably 70 degrees outside. That's one of the most beautiful December days I can recall. And they were even able to do some of the festivities that night outside. I don't know if you remember the next day, but it was about 43 degrees and raining. And that's when my dad met with his budget secretary. And I remember her saying, "Governor, I hope you enjoyed yesterday, because today I'm here to tell you that not only is the cupboard bare, but you're facing an international recession." So coming in at any job can be challenging. What you've got to do is surround yourself with the absolute best people and to be personally ready. That's why I'm following many of the major issues, lawsuits, et cetera, in front of the Attorney General's office right now. I'm reading the pleadings related to the issues that you care about most. I'm following the arguments on Section 111D, because I'm a lawyer's lawyer. And in the end, the guidance on those lawsuits is going to come from the top. There is going to be personal participation there. Otherwise, I think what you do is you surround yourself, like I said, with some of the best people. You pick some of your top leaders and you ask them to be leaders. Because ultimately, if we're going to do more, if we're going to stretch every dime like every family's going to do, we need people that can not only follow guidance and perform well, but can get out there and inspire more, can get more out of more people, can be the type of leader where we can do more to combat drug abuse, where we can do more to address child abuse. What you're going to see in the first couple days, if or when I'm elected Attorney General, is you're going to see us immediately looking at the structural changes that go along with my priorities. Just like Jack created the cybercrimes unit, you will see me putting together a restructuring plan so that we have that division of child abuse and exploitation. So we have that division of senior protection. And so we have structured the office in a way that helps our one and only client as Attorney General, which are the 4.6 million Kentuckians. You know, I've worked inside of a law firm that is larger than the Attorney General's office. I've worked with their budget. I've worked with their restructuring, which you do on a yearly or a bi-yearly basis to best serve your clients. I'm looking forward to bringing that exact same experience into the Attorney General's office, where we will do what every family out there in Kentucky is doing. We'll do more with less.
As you gentlemen know, our industry has had an adversarial relationship with President Obama and this administration, and actually received 5 different cards with the same question. If elected, will you support the Democratic candidate for president, and will you campaign for them? And specific question about Hillary Clinton.
Look, I'm a Democrat, and I tend to vote Democratic. I have voted for Republicans in the past, but I tend to vote Democratic, and it's my intention to vote for a Democrat in 2016. I don't know who that will be, but at this point I certainly intend to support the Democratic nominee in 2016. I don't know who that's going to be. I've said in debates so far that I was very close to the former Attorney General of Delaware. He was a dear friend of mine, and out of respect for him and his family, I'm going to wait until the field is set and then figure out who to support from there. But I am a Democrat. I am a proud Democrat, and I intend to be a Democrat in 2016. How active I will be, I don't know. But let me say this: my first priority is Kentucky. I'm running for governor not because I want to be involved in the Washington style of politics. I'm running for governor because I want to make Frankfurt work. I want to see things work in Frankfurt. You were asked I was just asked what's some of the first things I'm going to do when I'm elected governor. And I talked about the cabinet, and I talked about the budget. One of the first things you have to do is sit down with legislators too and figure out where you're headed in that session. And when I'm governor, I'm going to put Kentucky first. And I'm not going to get engaged in some level of federal activity in 2016 that is to the detriment of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I can assure you of that.
Well, Bill, I was just, as I sat down there, remembering that the first part of your last question is, what's the first thing you're going to do when you wake up on November the 4th? And somebody asked me that the other day, and I looked him in the eye and said, I'm going to drive my kids to school. You know, I miss that. That's going to be the first thing that I do that day. But I appreciate the question because it recognizes that in a year, we're going to have another president. And if you watch some of the commercials out there, you wouldn't think that's the case, but we are going to have another president. And what I'll tell you is it doesn't matter who that president is. When they do something that hurts Kentucky, that hurts our interests, that hurts our ability to create jobs, I will oppose them. Democrat, Republican, Independent, doesn't matter. I'm elected to represent Kentuckians. And the moment I take that oath of office and walk into that office, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, I'm your Attorney General. Likewise, when a president does something positive for Kentucky, no matter who that president is, I want to be supportive of it. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, you're going to see a Kentucky First Attorney General from me. And this is my first run for office. I've now been working almost 2 years in this campaign. So what I can pledge to you is what you'll see out of me from 2015 to 2016 is somebody who's going to show up to work every day and spend every hour on that job and not anything political.
Okay. One of the good things about us streaming out these presentations is that people at the workplace right now can hear from these candidates. But the other reason why I like this idea is because we have 8,000 coal miners in Kentucky who are out of work since 2012. And if you travel Eastern Kentucky, if you talk to any of these folks, not only them, but also the 3 other Kentuckians, at least, who lose their livelihoods when a coal miner is put out of work in Kentucky. I'd like to give the gentleman a moment to talk to these folks, these out-of-work coal miners. Why should they vote? Why should they vote for them? And what can they do in 4 years to help them?
Well, thank you, Bill. Before I address that question, let me also talk a little bit just about the political question that you posed just before. I want to point out to this group that I'm a member of the Coal to Blue Coalition with other Kentucky Democrats like Rocky Adkins. I think it's important to have pro-coal voices within the Democratic Party. You know, people like me or people like Joe Manchin making certain we speak to the leadership of the Democratic Party about how important coal is and how important coal is in states like Kentucky. To the out-of-work coal miners who are watching via live streaming, I can only say that my heart goes out to you and your families. As I travel through Eastern Kentucky, I can literally feel the despair and the concern as people are out of work, as jobs that have been in these communities and these families for generations are no longer there. And so I feel that. I feel that at a very visceral level, and I understand how painful it is. The only thing I can say to those miners is I'll try to work with you as best I can. You know, I'm the only Democratic Attorney General in the country to sue the EPA. I've sued them over 8 times. I'm 8 times actually, and we continue to fight hard. If there's anything I can do to help bring coal jobs back to the coal fields, I will certainly do it. I will fight for markets for Kentucky coal. I will be a voice within the Democratic Party to ask this particular EPA and this particular administration to get more reasonable because they haven't been, and they've unfairly targeted Kentucky. And I understand that coal has put food on the table for Kentucky families. Not only put food on the table for Kentucky families, it's helped keep electricity rates low, which we use to create a heck of a lot more jobs here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So I will fight for you. I will try to bring the jobs back. If there are things that we can do to retrain workers for the jobs of the future, we will do that as well. I'll work closely with Congressman Rogers to make certain that we bring broadband first to Eastern Kentucky so that we have connectivity in Eastern Kentucky to create jobs for the future. But I want you to understand that my heart breaks. I understand how tough it's been. And when I'm elected governor, I'll do everything I can to try to make a brighter future.
To those out-of-state coal miners, I've walked through your towns. I've met with many of you, and we've talked about your situations. And I'll tell you today what I told those that I've had the opportunity to meet with then. I'll wake up every single day in this office to fight for you, to fight for your future. Whether that's fighting the EPA and being as aggressive as we can, both to get a successful outcome, but also to get it as quickly as possible to bring as many of those jobs back as we can, I'm going to do that. I'm also going to wake up every single day to fight for a better future for you and your families, because you are being overridden even more than the rest of our population by these challenges of drug abuse and child abuse and scams. I'm going to work to help create every single opportunity I can for you, whether it's through the SOAR project or others. I'm going to make sure that we don't let national debates like over mass incarceration keep us from creating direct jobs in your areas like that federal prison in Letcher County. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fight for you, and I'm going to fight for you directly. And I'm not going to let philosophy or national issues get in the way of that. I'm elected to represent you. I'm elected as the Attorney General to protect you. And I'm going to show up every day to do that, which is my job.
Another question that I've received several cards about is regarding incentives for the coal industry, incentives to make us more competitive. The companies in this room not only compete with each other, but also other fuel sources and other coal basins. What do you see, I guess more towards you, General Conway, what do you see as something, incentives for the industry, anything you could do from an economic development standpoint that would help us be more competitive, much like it's been done for other fuel sources, especially renewable sources by the Obama administration?
Well, thank you for the question. Let me first of all say I have some experience in this area. As you remember from my earlier comments, I talked about being the lawyer who actually sat down and put pen to paper and wrote out the thin seam tax credits. As we are mining thinner and thinner seams in eastern Kentucky, I think it's important to have tools like that in the toolbox to help our coal companies. As I mentioned as well, in western Kentucky, when we had a situation where the Kentucky Industrial Reinvestment Act didn't really meet the needs of Peabody Coal 15 or 20 years ago, we tweaked that to make certain that they could actually access that for reinvestment. And that's the big deal. We have to take a look at the economic development cabinet. We have to take a look at the incentives that are out there. And if coal companies want to reinvest in equipment, if you want to reinvest in ways that you can mine, particularly in central Appalachia, we need to come up with some tax incentives to help spur on that investment. Listen, I know it's a tough market out there. I've talked to coal operators who say, listen, the market's at $48, $49 a ton, and it's costing $55 to get it out of the ground. It's tough. I understand that. So we have to look at ways that we can abate taxes or that we can provide incentives for the reinvestment in the coal mines of eastern Kentucky in particular to make it more economic to mine the coal. And listen, I promise when I'm elected, if there are opportunities within our economic development statutes to incentivize investment in coal production, I will work with you. Come see me. You'll have a seat at the table, and we'll try to figure out together how we can make it as competitive as possible for us to invest in the coal fields of eastern Kentucky.
I'd like to give these gentlemen a few minutes to make some closing comments, and then we'll wrap up. But first, let's thank them very much for being here today. I really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you for coming out. We'll start with Andy Beshear and then go to General Conway for closing comments.
Well, once again, to all of you all, thank you for having me today. This has been a great 2 years. It's been an amazing journey. You meet incredible people. You get to learn some pretty amazing things. I think ultimately, when it boils down to it, there are two types of candidates that run for office. There are the people who are running for something and the people who are running against someone. I think you see with me that I'm not only running for something, I've been crystal clear about what I want to do and how I want to go about it. I started this campaign with 3 key priorities that are still my priorities today: addressing child abuse, drug abuse and drug treatment, better protecting our seniors against scams. Over the course of that campaign, we put out specific plans that show you not only what our priorities are, but exactly how we want to go about achieving progress in them. So as you sit here today, simply by going to our website, you can see exactly what you're going to get in the Attorney General's office. I'm proud as I stand here today to be supported by every living Attorney General. And what they've told me are 2 things. Number one, that I'm not only ready for this job, but but I can achieve in it. And number two, they've reaffirmed my belief that through the Attorney General's office, you can do a lot of good. So I'll make you and those watching one simple pledge here today. With your votes, with your support, if you get me elected Attorney General on November the 3rd, I will give you one of the hardest working public officials you've ever seen. We will win this EPA lawsuit. We will make a difference in child abuse. We will do better on treatment. We will keep more kids from using drugs. We will better protect our parents and grandparents. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me here today. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I appreciate the friendship that many in this organization have shown me over the years. And just to close out, I would just say this: look, I understand Kentucky. I have a plan for Kentucky, and I have delivered for Kentucky. You know, Kentucky's my home. This is where I was born and raised. I talked to you a little bit about my father being from Union County and understanding the agricultural and the energy sectors in this state and how important it is to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. There's a 20-year record there. There's a 20-year record of working with Governor Patton on things like thin-seam tax credits and working on better incentives for coal production in the state. So I certainly understand the state. I have a plan for the state. Please go to our website at conwayoverly.com. My running mate Sandy Overley and I are working so hard in this campaign, and we've put forward both a jobs plan and an education plan. Our jobs plan actually builds on Kentucky's core strengths, coal and energy being one of those core strengths. We also seek to create the best business climate that we can for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And we're also focused on worker retraining and making certain that the employers that are here in this state can find the skilled workers that they need for the future. And look, folks, the best indicator of what someone's going to do in the future is what they've done in the past. Folks, I've delivered for Kentucky. As your Attorney General, as I mentioned, we've shut down half the state's pain clinics. We're no longer getting flooded by pills from Florida. We see now prescriptions for OxyContin and hydrocodone going down. We've created a cybercrimes unit that's taken 800,000 child porn images off of the internet. I've cut my office's budget by 40%, yet returned over $300 million to the state treasury. And I've tried to deliver for this industry that's been so important to the economy of Kentucky. I have taken on the EPA. I've been the only Democratic Attorney General to do so. I've tried to be a voice for reason within my party. I stood up on the MATS rule. I'm standing up on the greenhouse gas rule. I'm fighting as hard as I can. And folks, I'm going to fight as hard as I can as your Attorney General. I'm going to fight as hard as I can when I'm your governor. I'm going to put together an administration that works with you, and together we can safely, hopefully safely and economically mine coal and protect Kentucky's low-cost energy advantage. Folks, this is a big election coming up in 25 days or so, and I would be honored. I would be honored to have your support. So thank you. Thank you for what you do for the economy of Kentucky, and regardless of political party, I think we can all agree that we want God to bless Kentucky. Thank you so much.
I'm going to throw an audible at General Conway because I know he can handle it. So I apologize. I want to ask about unmined mineral tax. It's my mistake. I meant to ask him about that. I'd just like him to say a few words about that because I know he's familiar with the issue. It's a serious concern to a lot of the companies in the room. Gentlemen, I apologize. Those were good closings, but I do want to ask that question. So let me make sure we cover that ground.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Well, look, the unmined minerals tax, given that coal production is under such severe pressure right now, I don't think it really makes much sense to tax something until it comes out of the ground. And that's where I am on that, and I'm going to work toward that end when I'm your next governor.
Thank you, General. I appreciate that clarification. We're going to break for lunch now. For those of us joining by the internet, we'll start again at 1:15 or 1:45, Dave? 1:45 with the Republican candidates for Governor and Attorney General. Thanks so much for being in the room, and thanks so much for joining us by the internet. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you again for coming out. Thank you for your support of the Kentucky Coal Association and Kentucky coal mining. Our candidates are joining us. It's the Republican voice now that we're going to hear as far as the next governor and attorney general of Kentucky. We're going to be hearing from Matt Bevan, who is a Louisville business person and has been very outspoken on the campaign trail. When I think of Mr. Bevan, one of the things I like about him is you can tell he is speaking not only from his brain but his heart. And I look forward to hearing his remarks. We also have with us State Senator Whitney Westerfield, who also chairs the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And these two gentlemen, much like we heard from the two this morning, want to lead Kentucky for the next 4 years, which what I think will be difficult times. As everyone in this room knows, we face an administration in D.C. which we find adversarial to the production and use of coal. And hopefully these two gentlemen will be able to give us another option. I'd ask that they begin with Mr. Bevan. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your connection to our industry, and why you're running to be the next chief executive of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Without further ado, Mr. Bevan.
Outstanding. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You got it.
I appreciate you all being here. Thank you. It's kind of a head and heart I apparently need to bring to the equation here. So it is interesting when you find yourself running for office. It's a humbling position in some measure, you know, to stand here before you, tell you about ourselves, and ask for your help and your support. It's what's needed for both myself and for Senator Westerfield, who's running for Attorney General. These two positions are going to affect your industry more than anything else you're going to do in the next 30 days. How we vote, the decision we make in 4 weeks, is going to change not only your industry, but Kentucky as a whole for the next 4, 14, 40 years and beyond. It's critical. And the difference with respect to what we're going to be looking like as a state 4 and 14 and 40 years from now will be so much different depending on who you elect. And I come at you obviously with a certain element of bias in some of my thinking, but I would challenge you to look very closely at what each of us represents, but importantly as well, what each of us is offering as we look into the future related to the coal industry specifically. I'm a guy who grew up in a pretty simple way. I grew up in the mountains. I didn't grow up here in Kentucky, but I grew up in a mountainous area where it was a hard place to make a living. High unemployment, a lot of drug use, a lot of issues that, frankly, folks in parts of our state wrestle with. I was the second of 6 children, grew up in a home where we raised pretty much everything we ate. We raised crops, raised animals, and it was a simple, humble home, below the poverty level, but raised by 2 parents. I'm grateful for that. I was raised with a good work ethic. I was raised to give an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. I was raised to ensure that I never took something that I didn't earn. I was raised by parents who instilled within us good Christian values. And I'm unapologetic about the fact that they define my decision-making process as a husband, as a father, as a business person, and how I will be as the next governor of this state. It is those very same core values of letting your yes be yes and your no be no, of treating others the way you would want to be treated. These very values are frankly the values upon which this nation was built, upon which this state was carved from the wilderness. We've become increasingly apologetic about them. I think it's unfortunate, because I think we've seen a degradation ultimately of the very fabric of America, and ultimately the underpinnings of what makes us economically strong as well. And so this is a bit about myself from my background. Very involved in 4-H as a kid. That was my whole social outlet as a kid. First time I flew in an airplane, I was 17 years old. It was a trip I won in 4-H to go to Washington, D.C. to speak to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and to represent the state at National 4-H Conference. That was the highlight of my life to that point in my life. I went off to school. I went to Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. Graduated from Washington and Lee University and went into the military. I'm a former active duty Army officer. Did that for a number of years, did not make a career of it, but got out as a captain and then went into the private sector. That was 20 some odd years ago. In the last 20 some odd years, I've been in the private sector, like some of you in this room, an entrepreneur, somebody who has started a number of companies, invested in a number of companies, worked for a number of companies. I own all or part of 10 different companies right now, companies that are ranging from base level manufacturing, metal stamping operations, to high-tech things like medical devices. I have a company here in Kentucky. We just got FDA approval for a medical device related to earlier detection of Alzheimer's. It's an electroencephalography device, measures the electrical activity in the brain. I make all the bells for the Salvation Army. I make LED signs. Got a company involved in investment management, one in pharmaceuticals, one in composite decking and railing systems, a wide variety of things. I'm somebody who came from one end of the socioeconomic spectrum, but I've truly lived the American dream. I'm grateful for the fact that I've been blessed with opportunity to be able to employ other people and create jobs and opportunities, allow other people to pursue their own American dream. This is what motivates me. I'm married, I have 9 children. That motivates me as well. It really does. We had 5 children. We adopted a 6th child. And in the process of adopting that little guy, little Jonah, we learned of a sibling group of 3 other children who were needing a home. The oldest was already 10. I don't know if any of you have ever gone through the adoption process. It's a long, convoluted, bureaucratic roller coaster. And it's difficult to find homes, frankly, for multiple children together. And once you already have 6 children, really 6, 9, not a tremendous amount of difference in some measure. There really isn't. And so now we have 9 children, and we're very blessed. And these are also the things that motivate me. Somebody asked me why I wanted to be, it was somebody in your industry, actually. It's probably the best and most pointed question I've ever been asked. There was a gentleman who, upon meeting him, he said, "Why do you want to be governor?" That was the first and only thing he asked me, actually. And I told him, "Sir," I said, "it's less a function of this being something that I want to do, and it's more a function of it being something that I'm willing to do." And I've said that every time I've been asked since that time. That was the first time I was asked. And it's true enough. There's a distinct difference between those who are desperate for the job and want it and will say and do anything to get it, and those that are willing to do the job. There's a very distinct difference. I would challenge you, please, in the days and weeks ahead, to focus on that difference and ask yourself which of the 2 people standing before you has the opportunity to be your next governor. There's a third fellow who won't be your next governor, but it'll be myself or Jack Conway. One of the 2 of us will be the next governor of this state. And I challenge you to ask yourself who truly has the motivations that you trust. Go back and look at the actual facts, not just what people are saying now as they run for office now, as they run for statewide office now, as they're running to be governor of a state where this is topical now, but look what they have done along the way. Back in 2010, KCA actually brought suit against the EPA. EPA was basically hampering the issuance of permits here in this state and brought suit to put the stop to that. KCA asked others to join suit with them. City of Pikeville did. Kentucky Energy and Environmental Department did. The ask was of our Attorney General to join suit. He chose not to do so. There was then a joint committee chaired by Senators Smith and Senator Gooch, who in a bipartisan fashion met, voted, asked our Attorney General to join this suit. Again, he refused to do so. A month after refusing to do so, he took a check for $4,000 from the Sierra Club. That's the very same Sierra Club that earlier that year had pumped over $11,000 into his campaign when he was running for senator. These things matter. You're being told a very different story now. It's easy to stand before you and talk about being a friend of coal. I don't know anybody who isn't willing to be a friend of coal, with rare liberal exceptions. But it's who will really fight for coal when it comes down to it. Who really will have your back? Who really has the ear of the people that have the opportunity to be the leaders of this state? I'm one of 2 people that has the opportunity to be the next governor of Kentucky. The Sierra Club has never given me a red cent. When asked recently in a debate who was the #1 advisor to each of us politically, Jack Conway very quickly said Crit Llewellyn. Didn't blink an eye or miss a beat. Crit Llewellyn was the very same person who, when Allison Grimes was running for senator, was on tape stating that Allison Grimes has to pretend to be a friend of coal because she's trying to get elected in Kentucky. Don't worry, she's really with us. She's the #1 advisor to Jack Conway. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled. Don't be played for fools, because there are people who truly believe that you will buy whatever is fed to you. And personally, as a taxpayer, as a guy who grew up in a humble way and has been blessed to live the American dream, as a guy who respects this country, as a guy who wore this country's uniform, as a guy who served with people that are dead, whose kids have grown up without a dad, I'm offended by people who will lie to you or lie to anybody and say whatever they have to say to try to further their political careers. You deserve better than that. Kentucky deserves better than that. America deserves better than that. This is why I stand before you. This is why I am running. I'm a business guy. I've never been a politically elected person. But I am willing to fight for this state. I am willing to fight for your industry because, frankly, your industry is every industry. Your industry is one of the greatest competitive advantages we have as a state. We are blessed with 2 basins you couldn't recreate at any price. We have the Central App Basin, we have the Illinois Basin, we have met coal, we have steam coal. We've got an extraordinary abundance of resources you could not replicate at any price. We have a geographic location you could not replicate at any price. We have riverways and roadways that transect through this state. You could not replicate that at any price. We have 4 seasons, none of them too extreme. You could not replicate that at any price. We have logistical hubs of UPS and DHL that would be hard to replicate at almost any price. We've got advantages that if we took advantage of them, this state could be a beacon for manufacturing in America and other things as well. This is my passion. This is my belief. We are a pale, pale shadow of what we could be as a state. We are 45th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and almost everything we'd like to be at the other end of the spectrum in. This is my vision for Kentucky. There's a verse in scriptures that without vision, the people will perish. True enough. And the very same thing is true for this state. The very same thing is true for the coal industry. We need a governor who will stand on the autonomy and the sovereignty that this state has been afforded under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. This is something you can speak to, but you need somebody that will actually do it. I don't need to further a political career. I haven't even left the private sector yet, and I already miss it. I am as serious as I can be about the things that need to be done for this state, and I am willing to make the sacrifices necessary, both personally and on behalf of this state, to get these things done. We need somebody that will stand on our autonomy because the 10th Amendment states very clearly, definitively, without any equivocation whatsoever, that the powers not specifically given to the federal government are the responsibility of the states and of the people. And as long as the U.S. Constitution still matters, and it's questionable at times whether it seemingly does, and yet I believe it does, and if you look at case law and precedent over the last 150 years, every time a state has truly stood on its 10th Amendment rights, it has won. It would be adjudicated. These things would go to court. This is what the EPA and other regulatory agencies do. They tie people up through permitting processes. They tie people up through the legal process. We need a governor that will stand firm through that, not bend like a reed in the wind, not say one thing to you when they're standing here and turn around and take money from other people. Even in this campaign, in addition to the thousands of dollars Jack Conway has received from the Sierra Club along the way, who on their website right now states emphatically that they want to see this industry gone. That the future that they see is one in which coal is not either mined or utilized in any way, shape, or form. Even in this campaign, he has been hobnobbing with and going to fundraisers with these folks in New York City who have had the poor judgment of actually tweeting out pictures of themselves with him, not realizing that probably gets seen and doesn't reflect well on his efforts to pretend to be a friend of coal. You have a very distinct difference between the two of us. You've had a chance to hear him speak. Listen to each of us and ask yourselves as you enter into the voting booth, and as you talk to people between now and when you enter into the voting booth, who do you trust? Who do you think is really shooting straight with you? Who do you think, if you had to trust your business to one of us, who would you trust it to? If you had to leave the country and trust the safety of your family to one of the two of us, who would it be? The likelihood that your children will be able to find employment in this state, as opposed to having to leave this state and go somewhere else, which of the two of us would you trust? Which of the two of us do you trust to actually have a grasp of the issues, not to be scripted and handed memorization bullet points from people, but who've truly studied this and have a passion and a heart for doing what is right for your industry and for Kentucky and for taxpayers in general? Who do you trust? Because the answer, if that's not easy to you, continue to dig until it is. But we are two very, very different people. From a financial standpoint, from a social standpoint, from a background standpoint. If you couldn't trust one of us to do any of the things I've just mentioned, because ultimately this race who's ever been the chief. Affect every industry is initially that manages more than $5 billion today. And this is also part of why I'm willing to do the things that others are not willing to do. Because nobody will ever cut a ribbon by fixing the pension crisis. Nobody will ever cut a ribbon by bringing changes to labor legislation in this state. Nobody will ever cut a ribbon by bringing tort reform to this state. Nobody will ever cut a ribbon by dealing with the Medicaid expansion and the unsustainable nature of that financially. Nobody will ever cut a ribbon by fixing the tax policy in this state and updating it. None of these things will allow anybody to get a favorable write-up from an editorial board. And yet every one of these things must be done. We need to stop convening blue ribbon panels and talking ourselves into a hole. We've done too much of this in this state. We deserve better than this. I'm offering you an opportunity to go in a different direction. I'm not a career politician. I'm a guy who comes with a different perspective. I will come with an open book, an open piece of paper, an open door, and an open ear. And I'm agnostic as to where those ideas come from. I don't give a rip if they're Republican ideas or Democrat ideas. If they're the right ideas, they will be heard, they will be implemented. This is the commitment I make to you. So who do you trust? I appreciate your time. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from the candidate for Attorney General, Senator Whitney Westerfield. Again, he does serve as chair of the Judiciary with the State Senate here in Kentucky, and we appreciate him being here as well. Senator, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Oh. Oh.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Well, there's one vote down, 60 to go. All right. I'm Whitney Westerfield, and I'm running to be your next Attorney General. As was said, I serve in the State Senate right now. I'm the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, a post I've held since my first day on the job. But before I was in the Senate, I was an assistant Commonwealth's attorney down in Hopkinsville, down in Christian County, just south of the Illinois Basin mines that are operating in West Kentucky. And I was there for a little over 5 years, prosecuted cases from homicides to misdemeanors and everything in between, and resigned that job to run for the State Senate. I took out a 20-year incumbent that I thought had long since quit putting in the effort that was necessary for the job and whose policies I don't think reflected that of the district. And God blessed me with a victory. And as I said, since the first day on the job, I've served as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, where I've been able to do some good work for the people all across Kentucky. You know, as a prosecutor, trying those cases, I've worked with victims' families. I've worked with victims themselves, or sometimes just the surviving family members of victims who have been killed. I've walked with them through trial processes. I've held their hands. I've wiped their tears. I've hugged them. I've gone through that whether we won or we lost. I've worked with law enforcement in my own community to fight for public safety where I'm from. And now as a legislator, I've been able to do that on a statewide scale, moving legislation that's enormously, hugely legislative lifting, that's bipartisan, and that's now a national model. Last year was the Juvenile Code Bill, Senate Bill 200. It was the bill that I sponsored. It's now a national model, and we toss that phrase around a lot when we talk about legislative achievements, but this is actually what's going on. West Virginia, another coal-producing state, similar situation on some issues related to juvenile justice reform anyway, and they borrowed whole chapters of our bill. South Dakota has looked at it. Kansas has got a task force studying it right now. What we did here in Kentucky, I've been able to share with the rest of the country, and other people are seeing what we've done. We've shown leadership, and we've accomplished something that changes the trajectory of children's lives, changes the trajectory of their families' lives, and in the process, saves taxpayer money. In fact, saves some taxpayer money that we can't even track. This year it was the heroin bill. For those of you who aren't from Lexington or northern Kentucky or have family there in these parts of the country, you don't understand perhaps how serious the heroin problem is. People in Hopkinsville don't have a perspective on it. Because in northern Kentucky, they have places where in repeated months, people have deaths of overdoses on heroin that number in the multiple dozens a month. Imagine if you went back to your hometown and you were encountered suddenly with multiple dozens of overdose deaths from one drug, from one thing. That's the kind of problem that we faced. We've been working on it for 3 years in the Senate, in the legislature, and finally this year we got something done. It took people who are as far left from each other as they are far right, philosophically, to be in the room and work on something, and we accomplished it. Something that beefed up penalties for the traffickers. Something that gave access and additional access to substance abuse care for people that are suffering from addiction. Language in that bill specifically I've been working on for a couple years to get into the law. I finally got into the heroin bill that gives priority access to pregnant women, because those are 2 lives that need to be taken care of. And in Kentucky, we have an exploding occurrence of something called neonatal abstinence syndrome. This is where a child's born drug dependent. These babies have to be weaned off of what their mother was using with morphine lollipops. We've had more in the first half of the calendar 15 than we did in all of calendar 14. But the bill that I helped write and language that I specifically put in there myself is helping to address the problem by giving them priority access to care across the state. Dating violence, not something that perhaps you're familiar with unless you've got a young daughter or a granddaughter or a niece. Perhaps they're in college. A lot of young women, many young women across Kentucky, across the state of Kentucky, are in danger because these protections didn't exist. In fact, they still don't, not until January the 1st. It's taken 9 years for that piece of legislation to get through the legislature. 9. It never made it out of the House until I was elected in 2012 and took office in 2013. I was the first senator to give it a hearing. And I've been pushing and pushing and pushing, and we finally got it through this year in a way that creates those protections for couples in dating relationships in a way that doesn't diminish the definition of family, the idea of domestic law, and those things that are important to those values in Kentucky. But we still created the protections. There was a way to do it, and I did that. I say all that to say this. That experience is important for the next Attorney General. The top law officer of the Commonwealth. The person whose job it is to stand in the gap and fight for public safety, fight for our rights, for our sovereignty as individuals, as Kentuckians, as business owners. Whether we're under attack from controlled substances or substance abuse, whether we're under attack from a federal government, and we are, who continues every day, every single day, to try to trounce and step upon our sovereignty as people. Your industry has been hurt the worst. 8,000 jobs and counting. You need an Attorney General that's going to suit up and go to court day one, who's going to fight for you day one, who has no interest in protecting the legacy of this president, this governor, or our current Attorney General. And I remind you that the current Attorney General we have, and my opponent's father and my opponent, all proudly supported this president and this administration, who for 8 years has done nothing but destroy this industry. Somebody told me before we walked in here that 8 years ago, or even just a few years ago, this room was filled with hundreds of you. I don't count 100 today. And for every coal job that's lost, 2 or 3 are lost that are connected to that, not to mention the economic benefits you've already heard about, that you already know about, that are in jeopardy because this president and this administration, state and federal, are going out of their way to destroy it. I have no connection that I need to treasure or keep. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that my opponent's going to be second-guessing whether or not he's going to call into question the most recent governor's conduct over the last 8 years. I won't have that trepidation. I suspect they tell you one thing and do something else. We've seen reports where they collude with the EPA. We've heard. But they'll come and tell you something different. I've actually done all I can just now as a legislator. Certainly in my voting history, but also just as a citizen, as a concerned part of the Kentucky that we're all proud of. I've testified twice this year in EPA public hearings, both times in an effort. Once, you all have seen video of it today, the stream protection rule. Thousands of pages, took years to write. They gave you 30 days to respond. That's meaningful. But earlier this year out in Oklahoma, where I testified at another hearing, where the corn growers, which is a big deal in my neck of the woods, as you might imagine, are being run over by, again, an EPA that is just bent on grabbing as much as it can, or giving you a set of rules and asking you to live by it and then changing those rules. Always moving the football or the goalposts to interfere with your work, to interfere with your jobs. And I ask you this simple question. Look at the last 8 years. If you're pleased with where we've come, if you're pleased with where we've been, if you look at your jobs, you look at your workers, your employees, you look at your homes and your communities, you look at East Kentucky and in the West, if you look at that and if you're pleased with where we've come in the last 8 years, then by all means, don't vote for the two of us. Vote for the other guys. Keep it going. If instead you want somebody with experience that's prepared to go to war and fight hard from the first day on the job, then you're looking at your two picks for the next governor and the next attorney general of the Commonwealth. Not someone who works for a firm that advertises attorney general defense work. Someone who, like the president, has gone out of his way to bankrupt a town in Kentucky. He's catching up with the president. The president's nearly bankrupted half a state. And he's working on it one town at a time. You can stay with that method. You can stay with those names. You can stay with the people that talk what they think you want to hear, or you can stick with the people that have the results. There are three things I want to do in the office of the Attorney General, and you've heard now about one of them pretty lengthily, and that's to increase and intensify the litigation of the office against the federal government or even the state government when it runs afoul of us and our rights and our businesses. Just yesterday, several states, including Kentucky, joined a letter to the EPA asking under the Freedom of Information Act to get copies of correspondence or communication that has happened between the Federal Register and the EPA. This wondrous clean power plan that will be devastating to the Commonwealth of Kentucky and every other coal-producing state still hasn't been published in the Register. It was announced as final months ago. And so here we sit, and keep in mind, we can't act on it until it's published in the Register. Yet there are still some timelines and time requirements under the Clean Power Plan that we as a state have to abide by, even though it's not published. Not only will I sue and litigate the EPA or any other regulatory body or agency that plays games with the laws themselves and the substance of the law, but when they play games on the game clock and they make it difficult for states to respond, to fight for what's important to Kentuckians and everywhere else, I won't be joining somebody else's letter. They can join mine. The second thing I want to do with the office is change gears here for a bit, is to beef up the cybercrimes unit of the office. Cybercrimes unit was created several years ago, but I want to give you, for instance, cybercrime does what you think it does. It investigates crime online, web-based crime. But I want to give you, for instance, in the room, the cybercrimes unit is about a fifth of the size of the room we're in. Not very big. Has a staff of about 4, maybe 5. Last I heard there were 4 people in there. Half a dozen or so computers. Some of those are dedicated computers, not connected to the web to do their forensic work. But I want to give you some context. The state police testified in Judiciary Committee this year. And they have a similar task force. It's not underneath the AG's office, but it's roughly comparable in size. Roughly comparable. It's called the ICAC Task Force, Internet Crimes Against Children. Now, the state police ICAC Task Force only investigates the internet filth involving kids in Kentucky, and they testified this year they're able to investigate only 2% of that filth. 98% of that is going uninvestigated and uncaught, the bad guys uncaught. 98% of those victims are going unsaved and rescued because they live hand to mouth on grant dollars that are not consistent, not reliable. Now, the cyber crimes unit is roughly comparable to that. That's got to be beefed up. In an age where all of us have a smartphone or we know someone that does, we're online, we conduct business, and we rarely go a day, much less a week or so, without hearing about some breach, some theft, whether it's of information or not. And sometimes it's the criminal element that's attacking us, or our Commonwealth's infrastructure, or the national infrastructure, or companies' infrastructure, IT infrastructure, or maybe it's another foreign government. And we're not doing nearly enough to be prepared for that and protect against it. And every age group in Kentucky needs to be educated and informed about what's going on. Senior citizens don't understand a phishing attempt in an email, a scam, when they see one still. When they think a little An email from grandson or granddaughter comes in, they don't know what that means. Parents don't understand what apps can do and what is shared and where it's stored and information and how it's kept and how it's distributed. And the kids don't understand what they're sharing and distributing themselves in those apps on their phones that their parents get them. This is a dangerous territory, and policy hasn't nearly caught up. And we've got to do better. And then finally, the last thing, we need to increase the efforts of the AG working with the General Assembly. I talked to you about the 3 big bills that I mentioned: heroin, dating violence, juvenile justice reform. Not once did General Conway participate in the discussions of those bills. In 3 sessions I've served in the state Senate, General Conway has darkened my doorstep exactly this many times to advocate for or against anything before the legislature of Kentucky. Not once. Not for prosecutors, not for law enforcement, not for coal, nothing. In the heroin bill, I told you that there were people in that room who on social policy couldn't possibly be further away from me on the philosophical spectrum. But we put that stuff aside and we got something done. My opponent's been on the campaign trail for 2 years. And the first 15 months or so of that was all by himself. And we've been working on a heroin bill for 3. Did he come to see me? No. Did he come to see my Democratic House counterpart? No. Talk is cheap. We need an Attorney General that's going to influence public policy in a way that saves Kentucky. Whether it's against the state government or the federal government, we need an AG that's going to get in the room and not worry about the daggum press conference, and not worry about whether or not they get mentioned in a press release, not worry about getting a quote in, roll the sleeves up and do something. Be in the room. Get yourself in the room and be involved. If budget dollars need to go somewhere, be in the room. Be the one that asks for it. I've been in the room as a legislator, as a legislator. If I have to force my way in as the Attorney General, that's what I'm going to do, to make sure that the safety of Kentuckians, the propriety of our businesses, our economy, our jobs, our homes, our communities, our industries are protected from government, regardless of what president's in the office next, regardless of what governor's in the office next. No offense. Don't do it. I'll wear you out. We need an AG that's going to advocate for the people of Kentucky and doesn't have strings attached to anybody else here, legacies to protect, and that has the experience that matters to get it done. Experience that's gotten me endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police and not my opponent. Experience that's gotten me endorsed by Kentucky Right to Life and by the National Rifle Association, not my opponent. I want to put that to work for you, for your families, for your communities, for this Commonwealth. I ask for your vote, and before I sit down, I just ask you to keep us in your prayers. Pray for Matt. Pray for me. Pray for our wives and our children. Pray for Andy and his wife and his 2 children. Pray for Jack and his children and his wife. Pray for the candidates you like and the ones you don't. Pray that God lifts up leaders who are going to move Kentucky in a direction that honors and glorifies Him. We have 25 days left to do that, so make that your prayer between now and then. Thank you for the time today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to remind everybody we have the 3x5 cards. If there's any more questions you'd like me to ask, I'm taking a few of them from our previous candidates and also asking some of those questions as well. But if you have any questions, let me know. Let's talk about a day that I'm sure you both are looking forward to, which is the day after Election Day. Tell me about your cabinet. Tell me about the organization of government. Tell me how you're going to hit the ground running, because it's a quick process in Kentucky. How do you plan to build a state government?
Yeah, we have 5 weeks. It's half the time, frankly, that most states afford a transition period. 5 weeks from the time the election is done until the inauguration takes place. I will arrive in Frankfort as unencumbered and unbeholden to anybody as we've had since 1979. The last time anybody arrived in Frankfort not owing anything to anybody was John Y. Brown. Some liked what he did, some didn't like what he did. It has nothing to do with politics or ideology, but he wasn't beholden to anybody. He wasn't owned by anybody when he got there, nor will I be. There is nobody who has any expectation of anything from me. This affords me an extraordinary opportunity to do what is right, and to do it with those that frankly bring solutions to the equation. There will be, I've used this analogy, and it's probably, appropriate enough. Everybody can come to Thanksgiving dinner, but I don't know if I grew up in a big family, and I imagine some of you did. And on Thanksgiving, a lot of people would come over, and there was the adult table and there was the kid table. I'm looking for the adults, frankly. Everybody can come eat dinner, but if they want to whine and complain and make noise and disrupt things and not have any solutions, they can eat their dinner at the kids' table. But if people are willing to come regardless of what their political past has been and party has been, I'll be honest, I'm a Republican. I've been a Republican my entire life. I'm biased these days into thinking that the conservative values that, frankly, many Kentuckians hold and have held, frankly, reside largely now in the Republican Party, certainly in Republican leadership anyhow. Most of those conservative values don't exist anymore on the other side of the aisle, at least in leadership. So most of the folks probably will come from the same persuasion as me politically. But I would ask each of you to transcend that, rise above that as you make your decision, because it's how I intend to do the very same thing. The biggest mistake that any governor can make, myself or Jack Conway or whoever the next governor might be, the biggest mistake would be to wait until you win before you put anything in place. I've already got a team of folks that, frankly, is a pre-transition team. It is comprised of people who are elected officials, people who are formerly elected officials, people who are business people, people who are retired from business. It includes lawyers, it includes accountants. It includes people who understand what it will take to transition. A transition team itself will have 100 to 150 people on it. In those weeks, it'll be like drinking out of a fire hose. What I am doing right now, and that you should take some comfort in, if in fact you like what I bring to the equation, is that we will not just start from scratch the day we win. We will, in the next weeks, as we have been doing, continue to put together a framework, the skeleton, as you would. The flesh on the bones of that skeleton will be put on during the transition process itself. But the skeleton will be built, it will be ready. There will be people in place to hit the ground running. That's what good governance is. I don't intend to replicate some of the mistakes that have been made by previous administrations. I intend to copy some of the smartest things I've seen done and avoid some of the biggest mistakes. I will tell you this as well, that on average the people in my administration, and there is nobody, not one, that you will find anywhere that has been promised anything by me, not one. I've made no promise to anybody politically in exchange for anything in this race. That's very different between me and my opponent as well. With that said, the people that I will surround myself with will have on average at least as much gray hair as I do. I'm 48 years old. I'm not a kid anymore, but Lord knows, Lord willing at least, I've got a little gas left in the tank. But I'll tell you this, I want people who have decades of experience in the real world. If it's somebody that's going to oversee the environmental issues in this state, they better have been in the real world on the receiving end of what all those regulations feel like. If it's going to be somebody in insurance, they better have well worked in the insurance industry. If it's going to be somebody responsible for transportation, they sure as blazes have better been inside of that industry, whatever the case might be. These are issues that we need to wrestle with adults, with people with gray hair, with people with real experience. I'm blessed by the ability that I don't need to be the guy who makes all the decisions. One thing I learned in the military was that you delegate. A mantra I developed while I was an officer that has served me well in the private sector is to be hands-off as much as possible, but hands-on as much as necessary. And this is exactly how I'll govern. I want to be the weakest link in the chain. And I say that because I have no intention of breaking. I intend to be the absolute best governor that it is possible to be and to represent this state to the best of my abilities. But if everybody I'm connected to in each of their respective areas of responsibility is as good or better at what they do as I am at what I do, that's a heck of a chain. That's a heck of a chain. This is what I intend to create. This is what we will create. And I'm telling you what, I will say this, if you do vote for me, do not fail to protect my flank. Do not do what we did the last time we changed gears in this state. And we sent an attorney general who did nothing but gut the governor from the time he got there. Greg Stumbo took it to Ernie Fletcher from day one, and who won? Nobody won. While people chalked up a few little partisan victories, and the D's got to crow over how the R's were doing this or weren't doing that, who lost? Kentucky lost. Kentucky lost relative to the states around us. Let's not do it again. Thank you.
I have made some inquiries. The question was about first day or November 4th. If it's November 4th, I will hopefully sleep in for the first time in a long time. But I've already made inquiries about transition staff, gauging some folks' interest. I'll have that in place right on time so that over the intervening weeks between Election Day and January, we'll hit the ground running with a full staff, being able to do the work of the office. And since I'm already familiar, again, I've got the experience having been a prosecutor. I understand how the office functions on a day-to-day basis on those frontline prosecuting offices all the way to Frankfurt, and administratively how they should function. Obviously, I'll get in there and make an assessment of where the money's being spent. I'm familiar with the budget, but it's not always transparent right now anyway, but I look to change that. About how much of the AG's budget is spent in each individual department, how much goes to the Office of Rate Intervention, how much goes to the Medicaid fraud and cyber crimes and so forth. So I'll make an assessment of where those dollars are being spent and see if we can't reallocate some of those, see if it's necessary to reallocate those, if they're being spent as efficiently as they could be, and then go from there. I've pledged not to increase my budget request for that first year because there are some of those questions I don't have the answers to and can't until I win. And I'm not going to, I could make blind requests, but I'd much rather be informed about the decisions I'm going to make. So that's what we'll do, and we'll be ready to go to work from the first day. If I've got to file the lawsuits myself, it'll get done. Thank you.
This question to Mr. Bevan. As governor, can or will you provide incentives to help eastern and western Kentucky stay competitive, especially as we face challenges from other fuel sources and other coal basins?
The answer is yes, and I'll tell you one of the greatest ways we do it is by standing firm on our rights as a state. I said this earlier, and I mean it sincerely. As surely as we stand here, it would not bother me one lick to tell the EPA to pound sand. And I hope I will have an attorney general that will back me up on that. But we as a state will do what we must to protect our sovereignty. Again, we've got two coal basins. Met coal's struggling, we know that. And everything is cyclical. But I'll tell you what, there has never been more coal consumed in the history of the world than there is right now. Never. How in the blazes are we not participating in that? Why should we not participate in that? You look at all the coal that is exported from America, we in Kentucky account for just over 1% of that. Why are we not a bigger percentage? Why are we not intentionally trying to become a bigger percentage? We have a governor and an attorney general who have of late said they are friends of coal, who are joining most recently, in addition to the one that I talked about where they for a long time took no part in defending the coal industry. They have of late jumped on board. And they crow about this. They were essentially forced into doing so, but it has been more than anecdotally corroborated that they have been colluding with the EPA while doing so, putting up a smokescreen of pretending to join suit while defying any ability for people to get Freedom of Information Act's request granted because they have documentation showing that they've been in communication with the EPA, showing that they're playing both sides of it. You deserve better than that. What can be done by the next governor? Stop playing those kind of games. What can be done? Stand firm on our sovereignty as a state. What can be done? Tell the EPA and every other regulatory agency that has no legal authority or recourse to enforce regulations, mandates, and edicts upon us to pound sand. And I mean it. The only recourse they would then have would be the legal process. This is why we have divided government. We have a separation of powers. We have the executive, we have the legislative, and we have the legal. And the only thing a unelected regulatory agency has is the legal channel. And this is what they'll do. They would sue us, and we will defend ourselves. And hopefully we'll have an attorney general that will do it and do it well and doesn't have to be begged into doing it or doesn't have to do it only to try to put lip gloss on something and pretend they're a friend. This is a state that could be great. For the reasons we talked about earlier, we have advantages that should make us the manufacturing hub of America. There's nobody better positioned to do it. What is it that manufacturers need, and lots of? Cheap electricity. What do we have an ability to produce better than any state in America? Cheap electricity. We sit literally on millions of tons of the very thing we need to continue to be competitive in that regard. You look at Germany, where they frankly have for decades pioneered what is green and renewable and alternative, and have been the envy of the Western world as they've looked at the future and what we think the future of energy might be. What are they doing right now in Germany? They're building from scratch because of last winter's rolling brownouts and loss of electricity and loss of heat. They are building 6 brand new coal-fired power plants in Germany right now, 18 on the European continent. Why are they doing this? Because they too want the very same things we're talking about. And they are importing coal as rapidly as they can, not only from places like Poland, but also from outside of Europe. And they're doing it because they need electricity, and they need it delivered cheaply, and they need it in a consistent fashion. We can do exactly that. It's what we should do and what we will do. The worst that the federal government can do is use their limited authority, which they do have in some areas, and frankly, some it's more than limited. They can use their authority to say, based on interstate commerce, that arguably, perhaps, we could not export electricity produced by coal in the state. So be it. We'll keep it in our own grid, and we'll have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cents a kilowatt hour electricity relative to states around us, and in the East and West in particular, where you can put at least a 1 in front of that. This conversion to natural gas is going to come back and bite the consumer in ways that is going to come back and haunt us if we don't get out in front of it. We're going to see 20, 30, 40, 50, 100% increases in fairly short order of time. We can't afford it. We don't need to do it. We need a governor that will stand firm against it. This is my commitment to you. It's not as simple as that. There's no magic wand. I don't imagine that people are going to, oh, well, okay, if you say you're not going to do it. We'll have to stand up for ourselves. Stand up to those that would tell us it's going to be another way. It can be done. It will be done. And this is a state that will lead by example. I know for a fact there are 26 other governors and or attorneys general. I was getting a call from one of these other governors as I walked in here, who I know is one of those I'm about to mention. 26 of them who will join suit, either the governor and or the attorney general, to stand firm against this next piece of legislation, which is the waterways of the U.S., which, trust me, is going to touch your world as well. The navigable waterways, what defines a navigable waterway? You've seen it as it relates to surface mining, et cetera, already, and the tailings and all of the things, and the regulation that is suffocating, utterly removed from reality, that will preclude people from doing anything on private property without permission slips from the government. Unacceptable to me, unnecessary, and something we won't do if I'm the next governor of this state.
We hear tale in West Virginia they're going to pass right to work next year. What are your positions on right to work?
It's coming to Kentucky whether we want it to or not, and I'm going to lead the charge to make sure it gets here as soon as possible. We cannot afford to be the only state in the South that does not have right to work legislation. Can't afford it. The opportunity cost is far too high. We're the only state in the entire manufacturing belt of America. If you go from Wisconsin down through Michigan, Indiana, down through us, all the way down to the Gulf, we're the buckle of that belt, and we're the only one that is not a right-to-work state. A full third of Fortune 500 companies have said they won't even consider expanding to, moving to, or creating jobs in a state that is not a right-to-work state, which means we're from start fishing in 2/3 the size of the pond that we might otherwise be. For others, it may not be an absolute eliminator, but it's one of the criteria. It has become a litmus test. We must pass right-to-work legislation in this state. It has to happen. And the sooner it does, the better it is for Kentucky. Because where there are opportunities, where there are people who are creating jobs, there's jobs for unions and non-unions alike. The 5 states in which union membership, ironically, is growing the fastest, not ironically, it's direct correlation to the decisions they've made. The 5 fastest growing states in which union membership is increasing, every one is a right-to-work state. Number 1, the number 1 state in which union membership is 25% higher today than it was a year and a half ago, Tennessee. Tennessee's creating more than 20,000 jobs a year more than we are. This state has seen a decline in jobs in this state, 71,000 fewer jobs in Kentucky than there were 8 years ago. And we have a governor and an attorney general who tell us it's going great and crow about an unemployment rate of 5-point-some%, when in fact we have so few people. We have the 47th lowest of any state in America. It is not economically. It could be. It to work legislation. I've touch on a couple things real quick. Right to work legislation is not going to happen if Jack Conway is the next governor of the state. Tort reform, not going to happen. Addressing the pension crisis, not going to happen. Addressing Medicaid expansion, not going to happen. Any kind of meaningful tax reform that doesn't simply mean raising taxes on you, not going to happen. None of these things are going to be addressed if we don't win this race, which is why I do need your race. I need your vote, but frankly, I need your engagement beyond a simple vote. I will lead the charge to bring right-to-work legislation. It will happen. Many of those counties that have passed it already from the bottom up are Democrat counties. They're down on the Tennessee border. They hear the sucking sound of jobs going over the border. It's going to come to the state. We just need it to come sooner than not.
I'm in favor of right-to-work legislation. I've supported it in the Senate. I'll tell you that before I ran for the Senate, I philosophically agreed with it. I think it's not right to force someone to pay dues to something that may do things they disagree with. I don't think that's very appropriate or fair to that employee. So I'm philosophically aligned with it. But since I've been in the Senate, I'll tell you that in my 3 counties, which border on Tennessee, Christian, Todd, and Logan counties, I have seen directly companies that have looked at my 3 counties, at my Senate district, and have gone elsewhere because of that reason. There are other reasons companies pick and choose different places to go, workforce development, education standards, and the like, but I can say that in my district, we've now had companies that have passed on Kentucky, and those jobs have passed on Kentucky for that reason alone, and I think we should change it. But as the Attorney General, let me make an important distinction. I can't pick and choose which laws I get to support, and there are certain laws I like and certain laws I don't, but I've got to enforce each one of them. Now, I certainly support right-to-work legislation, but I'll say this. I would enforce it as the Attorney General, and I believe that General Conway's amicus brief that he filed in Hardin County is actually using our tax dollars to sue and join with labor against one of our own counties with that brief. I think it's incorrect. There is case law that supports cities cannot pass such an ordinance. Case from Kentucky back in the 60s that supports that cities couldn't do it, but it was silent as to counties. And I'll also remind you that the home rule statutes passed in the 70s would have made even that case potentially found another way. I think the question about whether or not counties have the authority to do what they're doing right now is still open, at least compared to the city's question, and I tend to think they do have that authority, delegated to them by the General Assembly and certainly approved by Congress. I think right to work, even if I hated it, would still be lawful as the counties are doing it. The trouble, though, is that when these counties are doing it, you know, I talked in the early part of the campaign year. Warren County passed their thing, their ordinance, their right-to-work ordinance in late December 20th maybe, last year. And between December 20th when they passed and early spring, March-ish, somewhere in there, they had nearly 30 inquiries from companies wanting to come just to Bowling Green, bringing the better part of $500 million in economic input potential to one county alone because they did that. Now, that sounds fantastic, and I wish we could bring that statewide, particularly in counties that I'm partial to in Christian, Todd, and Logan that suffer being next door to one that's right to work. But the problem is uncertainty. And as long as that litigation continues, companies are a little gun-shy about making an investment, even if the county has taken that step, because there's a county that's now in jeopardy. And that's a gray area, and that's really risky for businesses to make an investment in a place when the legal issue is unsettled, very much like what you all are doing right now. The legality of the Clean Power Plan still hangs in the balance because of the procedural games that are being played between the EPA and the Register and whoever else. So I'm going to work to try to settle that and certainly work with the legislature and the governor's office to make sure that that becomes the law. I would support it. And again, even if I didn't support it, philosophically, I feel like the law backs it up. Thank you.
Much like we did this morning, we're not only going to ask about your positions on policies, but also ideology questions as well, which I think can be challenging and probably maybe the things you're not used to. But one of the cards I received is, what is your definition of a Republican and a Democrat?
A Republican and a Democrat is purely political identity. As I said earlier, and I don't mean to be dismissive of the fact that those things matter, I don't give a rip about somebody's political identity. I'm more interested in their ideological beliefs. I'm more interested in their values. I'm more interested in the things that are at their core the decision-making process behind all the things that they do. That, to me, tells me more about a person. There are some very conservative Democrats and some very liberal Republicans. They just happen to be registered as they are. It's important to me not to get hung up in party. And again, I've said it a couple of times. I challenge you again to rise above that, transcend that when you go into the ballot box. Encourage those you know to do the same thing. We cannot just keep doing something because Mama and Papa did it and would roll over in their graves if we did it something different. We owe ourselves better than that. We owe our children and our grandchildren better than that. We just do. There are things that matter from a social standpoint, and while you didn't ask them, I'll say a couple things that you can, again, take it. You may like it, you may not. It was mentioned earlier about the NRA. I have the NRA's endorsement in this race. Jack Conway has a C rating with the NRA. I happen to be a concealed carry gun owner. So is my wife. Arms is significant. I think it shall not be infringed means something. 27 total words. Those 4, I think, are unequivocal. I'll defend that at every turn, period. No question about it. Strongly 100% supportive of life. 100%. No equivocation. I truly believe in the family, traditional family. While the Supreme Court has ruled in opposition to what 75% of Kentuckians voted on 10 years ago, I absolutely believe that we do not suppress the rights of our clerks or anyone else in this state to accommodate the rights of anyone else. That equal protection under the law means exactly that. And that we have the ability to afford equal protection to everyone. And that the 14th Amendment rights of one are not mutually exclusive of the First Amendment rights of another. I've been clear on that from the beginning. I put forward a proposal back in July that would have resolved this whole clerk conflict long before it even began. Simply take their names off the forms. Don't require them to be the officiants. Let it be a downloadable form or picked up in hard copy. Let it be brought in then and filed like a deed, like a lien, like a mortgage, like any other document. That would have prevented all of this craziness from unfolding. This is what governors do. This is how I will govern. I will find solutions, and they will transcend an R or a D. Thank you.
That was a good question. I think Republicans and Democrats differ in a lot of different ways, though I think there is a great deal of overlap, and it's a continuum. You've got people that are in different positions on that scale. I can say that I align with the Republican Party because I believe in the values of that party. I believe in the traditional family. I believe in personal responsibility and being a good fiscal steward. I believe in the work of building our communities and helping the people around us, and serving the people around us fall on my shoulders as their brother, as their neighbor, and not on the government. And I would tend not to pick winners and losers in the way that we make policies and create the places that we live in and work in every day. And I feel like the other side feels the opposite on all those things, for better or for worse. A lot of us say the same things, use a lot of the same rhetoric, but look at what is borne out in the policies that either side wants to foster and develop. And I think one of those would prefer government be bigger, would prefer government be the place where people go to rely on and lean on, and in some respects that's okay, but to the extent that we become dependent on that and less dependent on ourselves and on each other, I think that's detrimental to all of us as Kentuckians, as citizens, as people, as neighbors, and as brothers and sisters. So that's my philosophical response to that philosophical answer.
Will you continue to support the SOAR initiative shaping our Appalachian region?
Yes. I'll give you a little more than that. But I mean, I went to the very first one. I went to the very first one in December. I think it's a fantastic initiative. The key is let's make sure that it produces results. I'm a business person. I'm looking for return on investment. Just simply showing up and having meetings and gatherings, if it turns ultimately into some version of these blue ribbon panels that we convene to study things and then do nothing with it, then I wouldn't support. But I don't think that's what it is. I think it has already begun to yield results. And I applaud, frankly, those who have been involved in putting it together. I think it is absolutely admirable. I think it's important. I was asked at that very first SOAR Summit back in December of 2013. I was asked, what would I do if I were an elected official? What do I think the role of somebody in government is to help the people of Eastern Kentucky, was the specific question. And the answer I gave is the same one I would give to you and will give at any time in this initiative or any other. Given the fact that our state is broke, frankly, and so too is the federal government, the better question we can ask is not what can the government do, because frankly, if there is no ability to pay for what might be done, we can come up with all the ideas we want. If we can't actually implement them, what good are they? The better question to ask is this: what can the government stop doing to the people of Eastern Kentucky? This is how I intend to govern.
I certainly will continue to support the SOAR initiative. It's what's needed in that part of the state. For those of you that operate in the east half of the Commonwealth, you know for sure. That's where the help needs to be put the most. It's where the work needs to be put the most. I do appreciate the initiative, and I'm thankful that it's there. And I hope it stays active and continues to build in a place that needs the rest of Kentucky to go to bat for it. Needs an attorney general and a governor that's going to go to bat for it. And that has nothing to do with party. It has nothing to do with what part of the state any of us is from. That's a part of Kentucky. And Kentuckians in the east are hurting. And it would be nice if we could, what Barack Obama and Obama supporters have taken from us over the last 8 years. And that's the easiest question, I think. Absolutely.
What could be done about Kentucky's unmined mineral tax? It's something that we hear a lot about in the industry, but the idea of taxing while the resource is still in the ground.
I'm opposed to it, and I'm opposed to it primarily because it's a game now that is, if we tie things up in court and we tie things up with a permitting process, and yet we expect people to pay a tax on something they have no ability to actually capitalize on, I think that's a bad idea. I really do. I would defy anybody to justify to me why it is a good idea in light of that. If you truly choose, if you are unencumbered in your ability to capitalize on that mineral, and you choose for whatever reason not to do so, fair enough. But if in fact you're unable to even avail yourself of the value at any time, I'm absolutely opposed to that. And we will eliminate that to the degree that we can. I want to touch on one thing real quickly, though, back to the previous thing. I was in Lynch, Kentucky, actually, last October. It was actually October 31st. It was Halloween. It snowed like 4 to 5 inches. It was kind of weird, actually. It was a freakish storm came through. But I was there with my family, my wife and my 9 kids and some other people, and we went down there to help people who needed some help, some older citizens who needed help putting plastic up on their windows or what have you. And I was struck by something in one of the homes in which I was putting up plastic. There was a man about my age. He looked a bit older than I was, but he was probably about my age. And he was sitting in there watching a widescreen TV, flipping through the channels, middle of the day, while I was down there helping out. It was a Friday. Didn't even, as much as I acknowledged him when I came in, didn't even make any real eye contact, just kind of grunted at me when I said hello to him. Never asked if he could help. Never asked if in any way, shape, or form he could contribute. I was struck by that because he didn't even seem to think that he should. We have robbed people in Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, and in too many parts of America of the dignity associated with actually taking responsibility for themselves. And we're not helping people when we do that, not even a little bit. If I'm the governor of this state, and you are a working-bodied, working-aged, able-bodied man or woman, you do not have dependents, you do not have children or people relying on you, you will not be receiving benefits from the state of Kentucky without having very specific expectations of you in return, that if you do not provide those specific expectations, you will get nothing, period. There's no reason for it. We are exacerbating a problem that and think that's cold-hearted. Let me tell you something. I grew up below the poverty level. I never had health insurance of any kind in my entire life until I was a U.S. Army officer. I know what this world is like. I know where I came from. And it was one of the greatest came as a result of the fact that I asked my father one time why, because we knew people, other people who we knew were better off than we did. They used to come in little brown boxes, looked like Velveeta. We liked the government cheese, actually. We'd eat at our friends' houses. And I asked my father one time why we didn't get the government cheese. And my father told me, don't ever take something that you didn't earn. I've never forgotten it. I'm grateful for it. It colors my mindset, my appreciation for what it takes to get from A to B. We as a state can be better, and we will be better when we demand more of ourselves, expect more of ourselves, stop robbing people of the dignity associated and the self-respect associated with doing for themselves. You hear often, you don't just want a handout, you want a hand up. True enough. Let's put our money where our mouth is as a government. How I will govern. Transform the mindset. It's hard. That now we've not lost one, but we're losing 2 generations. Instead of grandchildren being raised by their grandparents, you now have great-grandchildren raise their grandchildren's children. We are about to lose this battle. We need to take this seriously.
One of the reasons we're streaming this meeting out on the internet, not just for the media and for people who may be at work right now, but also to some of the coal miners out there who may be out of work. As you know, we've lost more than 8,000 coal mining jobs, direct jobs, since 2012, and for every 1 job lost, we lose at least 3 other Kentucky livelihoods. If you could speak directly to one of those unemployed coal miners, what would you tell them, and how would you use the office of Governor or Attorney General to help them?
Well, first I'd say, if you're watching this, thank you for your work. Thank you for your hard work. And I can't wait to have the job to try to put you back to work so that you can provide for yourself and for your family and for your community. I think I'd want them to hear, I'd want you to know, I'd want you all to know that elections have consequences. That's why I think it's important to get out there. Has voted for you all. And to vote for the people that are going to stand on us today, I think of the same old. Thank you.
Things Westerfield said. We do have a president who did say he was going to bankrupt the coal industry and is doing his best to do so. The man I'm running against, Jack Conway, voted for him after he said he would do that. It's inexcusable. You put all the rest of the words aside. When I was a kid, factory burned down. I remember even as a kid, at that point, kids, worrying about what was my dad going to do. His next worked at the counter at a McDonald's. Not doing that, and I'm grateful for that. We lived in the mountains. You had to drive down through a mountain pass about 45 miles to get to the nearest town that had any buildings of any kind, the kind that would pay people to clean them at night, office buildings. And I would go down at night with my dad, and we'd clean offices. I'd clean the ashtrays and empty out the trash cans. He would do other things, clean the carpets and what have you. I know what it's like. For those of you, if you are unemployed, or those of you that are underemployed, I've been there. There's a difference between sympathy. We have a lot of people that can be sympathetic, a lot of people that can feel sorry, and perhaps to be. They truly feel sorry. But the difference between sympathy and empathy is that people who are empathetic have been there. They understand it from firsthand experience. I challenge you when you go into the voting booth, for those of you that are watching, for those of you that are in this room, elect somebody who's actually created a only one running for governor who has ever only one. Jack Conway has not their life. I believe that it can, and I believe that it will. People that are not career politicians, by people who have walked in our shoes, who have served in the military, grown up in humble circumstances, made their own way in the world. These are the things that made America great. These are the things that will make Kentucky great going forward.
I have two final questions, and then we'll head to closing statements. The coal severance tax in Kentucky is very much out of step with a lot of other coal mining states, and we compete with other states regarding production and sale of our product. For example, in Ohio, it's 10 cents, and Illinois and Pennsylvania have 0 coal severance tax. How would your administration address that issue?
Again, it's about supply and demand. It's about competition. For us to be competitive, I think let's start again, as we talked about earlier, with the unmined mineral tax. I mean, that seems to me to be a no-brainer. As it relates to the other, truth be told, it's down to $200 and some odd million a year. It's still significant. That money is needed. It's needed increasingly by a lot of these counties, despite the apportionment. Frankly, the way in which that money has been apportioned probably should be rethought. I'm not saying to change it. If anything, I think more of it should stay where it is needed. It has historically always been enough that there was money to go everywhere. But the answer is not simply just to give it to those who can then spend it. There are more office parks, industrial parks scattered around this state with weeds growing up through the parking lots that have never been inhabited by anybody. Bridges and roads going into these places that millions of dollars have been spent on. People got themselves reelected for it. Ribbons got cut. But how did it really help anybody? Let's be smart about how the dollars are used. I do think we need to be smart about being more competitive. Ultimately, there's two sides to it. For many in this room, it being lower, of course, is an exciting prospect. It really is. It's something that would be desirable. But then there's a cost to that. It's already been diminished to the point that it's a fraction of what it was in terms of absolute dollars a decade and 2 decades and 3 decades ago. So we have to look at that cost-benefit analysis to all this. I'm not going to pledge to you that we would immediately start cutting that. I will immediately address the unmined mineral tax. That's something that I think we should, out of fairness, among other things, do immediately. As it relates to this, let's look at this relative to other things that we are doing and can do for this industry and for our economy as a whole. But we've got to be competitive with other states where the jobs and the opportunities will continue to flood there and not to us.
Final question to Mr. Bevan. What is your position on a state implementation plan as it relates to the President's so-called Clean Power Plan or final greenhouse gas regulations?
I've made clear that we will not submit such a plan if I'm the governor. I didn't say that just since I was running for governor. I put out a press release calling on our governor as soon as it was asked of the states. This is back in May of 2014, so about a year and a half ago, when it was first asked of states to start putting together plans to minimize their CO2 emissions. I put a call out to our then governor and current governor to stand firm against that, to not comply. It has subsequently become the thing for folks to do, and I applaud them for doing it. Other elected officials have weighed in and done the same thing. I think it's the right thing to call for it. I hope they all mean it. I do mean it. I put it out when I wasn't running for anything. I happened to have been running for something, and people still cared about my opinion of things, and so I figured, you know what? If I have the ability to put something out there that people will cover, write op-ed pieces that people will pay attention to, whatever the case might be, I'll do it because I thought it was important. And so this is something I firmly believe. I'd say the same thing about the Waters of the U.S. Act that's coming along behind it. Trust me, this one's a warm-up for other ones to come. And we'll tell the EPA to pound sand. It's the third time I've said it today, and I mean it. I really do.
Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. I thought we'd do closing comments if we could, and I'll begin with Senator Westerfield if I could. Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks for making time. You've been here all day. You've listened to 4 candidates, and I'm sure you're tired and you'd rather be talking and doing other things. And I appreciate you making time, and I appreciate the people who are watching the live stream for tuning in and listening. Because, as I've said, elections have consequences, and what the candidates have to say are important. You need to make an informed decision in 25 days. And I would just remind you to make a choice based on experience, based on who you think would do the best job in the office, who you think has the priorities that most align with yours, ready to do the job in the office. I'm a former prosecutor. I've tried cases. Life and liberty has been in my hands as a prosecutor before. The life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness for you and for your industry and for your workers and your families and your homes and your towns would be safe in the hands of me as your next Attorney General. I want the opportunity to do the job so that I can be the best Attorney General Kentucky's had in a long time. Somebody that's going to protect Kentuckians, fight for public safety. Who knows what it's like to do that? Who knows what it's like to hear from stakeholders in all walks and come in and be able to distill that into something that can pass the legislature, that can improve the lives of people across the Commonwealth? Who knows what it's like to go through the process of moving people that you think can't be moved and convincing people that policies are good and need to be changed for the better here and there? I've done that. The other side talks about it. I've had an opportunity to do it. And I've proven that I can do it. And I've had great success at doing it in a short period of time in the legislature and as a prosecutor. Experience matters. I don't think the seat should be bought. I don't think the seat of the Attorney General should be inherited. I don't believe Kentucky is particularly excited about dynastic politics like this. I want to do Kentuckians a choice on November 3rd, and now they've got one. In a race, if you haven't seen, that's a dead heat. And better than that, my opponent's dropped 2 points in the last 60 days, and I've climbed 5. And I think that's because people see that being a former prosecutor, working with law enforcement, working with the legislature, having a sterling reputation with people on both sides of the aisle, yet still standing firm on the values that Kentucky holds dear, is important and exists in the person of Whitney Westerfield. I'd love to be your next Attorney General. I ask for your vote, and I ask for your prayers as I have already today, and I appreciate your all's time today. Thank you.
We need him to be the next Attorney General of this state. We do. Simple as that. For your industry, for industry in general, to protect not only what is best economically, but for the core values, we need Whitney Westerfield to be the next Attorney General. We need Ryan Quarles to be the next Ag Commissioner in this state. We need Allison Ball to be the next Treasurer in this state. We need Mike Harmon to be the next Auditor in this state. We need Steve Nipper to be the next Secretary of State. This is a slate of candidates who is qualified, who is capable. Get to know their names. Get to know what each of them represent. You've heard from 2 of us here. But I'll tell you, we are on a slate with people who think like we do, who have the same Christian values, the same background, the same private sector experience. People who bring to the equation the very same things in each of their respective areas. This is what Kentucky needs. And in closing, I would just take you back to what we talked about at the outset. Who do you trust? You've heard from each of us. Who do you trust? If you had to leave everything to one of us, who would you trust? It shouldn't be any more complicated than that. We have great opportunity ahead of us. There's a lot of wood to chop. There really is. But Thomas Edison once noted most people in life miss opportunity because it usually shows up in overalls and looks like hard work. And that's true enough. We've got a lot of hard work ahead of us. It does look like it's dressed in overalls, but guess what? This is Kentucky. I love Kentucky. I want to lead this state forward. I'm tired of us being the butt of jokes. I'm tired of us being at the bottom of the pile on things that we should be, could be, and I believe will be at the top of the pile in. I'm fed up with us playing second fiddle to people who are frankly should be playing second fiddle to us. I will fight for the state. I will fight for those of you that are sitting at home watching this, that will watch it later. For those of you that are in this room, this is not a game to me. I'm not looking to build a new career path. I'm a businessman. I'm an outsider. I'm a military veteran. I'm a father of 9, and I will fight for this state like nobody else that's running for office. I'd be grateful for your vote. I would be honored to serve as the next governor of Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you all for being with us today, both in person and through the internet. The Kentucky Coal Association does not endorse candidates, but we are politically engaged and politically active. So that's why hearing directly from candidates is very important to us as the leadership of the Kentucky coal industry. At this point, I want to thank our two presenters again for being here, for sharing their thoughts and their philosophies. And at that, we're adjourned. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm just going to take photos here.